Chapter 76. That's right. Minky suddenly shouted from the side, startling Reo, who was deep in thought. Geez. Big sis, jumping in like that out of nowhere is seriously scary. Minky blinked, realizing her abruptness, and stuck out her tongue sheepishly. Well ma, I just remembered it suddenly. Forgive me. Reo gave Minky a sideways glance. Back then, the hunter exam ended because HxH killed Pakal. HxH was disqualified and was about to be escorted out, but then something totally unexpected happened. Reo's lips twitched. Getting tangled up with HxH. This person must be an Illumi fan. You don't even know, the guy was insanely ugly, then suddenly pulled out a bunch of needles and instantly turned into a total hottie. WDNMD, it was like an explosion. And then something even more shocking happened, it was more over the top than a novel. Yup. Definitely an Illumi fan. You know who that was? Let me give you a hint, his brother is in your group. Minky pressed a finger to her lips, pouting dramatically. Go. Reo really didn't want to deal with this little demon right now, she was constantly testing his self-control. Who was it? I have no idea. Reo feigned ignorance to see how Minky would react. Sure enough, Minky's eyes lit up with excitement when she thought Reo didn't know. Her big eyes sparkled as she leaned in, closing the distance between them until only a palm's width separated their faces. I'll tell you, bet you'd never guess, it was Jitara-kun. But his real name is Illumi Zoldyck, your group member's older brother. He came to get a hunter license for his next mission. As a professional assassin, he used the license to move more freely. Weird, right? I think he's super weird. Minky flopped onto Reo's bed but slipped off the edge. Ah. Whoa, whoa. The silver strands of her hair caught the air as she slid down. You. Minky was stunned. The guy in front of her had totally taken advantage of the situation. And he was supposed to be her apprentice someday. How was she supposed to treat him normally after this? Reo looked at her changing expression and smiled faintly. Ha. It's just the two of us here, no need to overthink. You fell, I didn't do anything, and since it already happened, I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Minky's face turned beet red at Reo's words. Flustered, she punched him lightly in the chest and ran out of the room. Well, Reo knew he'd messed up. Shifting the blame onto her would have been a death sentence. He quickly chased after Minky and grabbed her just before she left. Okay, Master Minky, don't be mad. It's my fault, I shouldn't have said that. We were really close just now, it was just an accident. Minky tried to wrench the door open, but Reo's words made her pause. He pushed his luck a bit more. I know a lively and beautiful girl like Master Minky is super popular with boys. I lucked out this time, don't be mad, okay? Minky turned back around. The earlier fluster had faded, and now she looked pleased by the compliment, totally forgetting about the incident. That's right. What you said is true. Girls like me are super popular, you know. But this little accident? That's our secret, okay? No one is allowed to talk about it. Minky was naturally bold and outspoken. What just happened had caught her off guard, but thanks to Reo's smooth talking, she was more willing to brush it off. She crossed her arms over her chest, signaling Reo to stay quiet about the incident. Reo saw her expression and knew the issue had blown over. As long as he didn't bring it up again, he'd avoid any explosions. As for the future? He could worry about that later. Right now, there were more important matters, like training his nen and dealing with his left arm, which had been severed by HxH. Learning nen would be easier, he had a teacher in front of him. But dealing with the lost arm? That was another story. Among all the abilities he knew, only Maki from the Phantom Troop could potentially reattach limbs. He'd probably need to find her. The thought made Reo uneasy. Maki's personality wasn't easy to deal with. Even HxH, a troop member, had to pay for her services. As an outsider, Reo would probably face even harsher terms. Reo? What are you thinking about? You're ignoring me. Rio's thoughts were interrupted by Menki waving a hand in front of his face. Had he zoned out again? Geez. I don't fall under any specific hunter category anymore. You said before you were thinking of becoming a gourmet hunter. Have you decided yet? Seeing Rio's blank look, Menki realized he hadn't been listening at all. She pouted and repeated her question. Reo snapped out of it and saw that Menki was a bit annoyed. Clearly, she'd caught on that he'd been spacing out, so he quickly gave a proper answer to avoid another scolding. Of course. I've thought about it seriously ever since the second exam. I believe food is my passion, my life's pursuit and the direction I want to follow. So I'm thrilled to join the path of a gourmet hunter and contribute through my own efforts. Reo hadn't thought that far, but hey, he knew how to talk the talk. His answer stunned Menki. She didn't expect him to be so passionate. Well, fine then. Tomorrow, we're heading out to find the sacred Caberinian lotus. Menki nodded in satisfaction and walked off. Wait, what? Sacred Caberinian what now? Reo stared blankly at Menki's retreating figure. Big sis, you could at least explain what the heck that even is, and... A quick break, hunters. Hopefully you're enjoying this fanfic. Let's keep going. Chapter 77. 5 days later. Reo wore a black cloak, trailing behind the woman in front of him, also cloaked, as they traveled across the barren desert. The purpose of this trip was to find a flower known as the holy sweet white lotus, though he still had no idea where their actual destination was. Master Menki, where exactly are we going? We've taken airships and trains these past 2 days, and now we're wandering through the desert again. You could at least tell me where we're headed. Ever since Menki had told him they were searching for the Saint Sugar White Lotus, Reo had been swept up in a haze of confusion. He'd left the next day, barely prepared. Thankfully, he had tracked down the guild leader before departure and demanded he uphold his promise, letting Reo pick a weapon. Under Menki's supervision, he'd ended up choosing a long knife. That was about the only thing that made sense. What baffled Reo the most was that he still didn't know what this so-called holy cabbage lotus actually was. Every time he asked, Menki would just flash a mysterious smile and say nothing. It left him completely at her mercy. As for calling her master? Well, wasn't it kind of fun? Huh? I didn't tell you where we're going. Oops, sorry, totally forgot. Menki, who had been walking ahead, paused at Rio's question. She turned with an apologetic look, rubbing the back of her head in embarrassment. Reo stared at her blankly. If he hadn't brought it up, she might have never remembered to tell him. We're looking for a plant called the Saint Camelite. It only grows on Meteor Street. She dropped that casually, still not explaining what the plant actually was. Meteor Street? So that's our destination? That really doesn't sound like a fun place. Reo sighed. He hadn't been to Meteor Street before, but the stories from the original Hunter narrative were vivid enough. What stuck with him most was their infamous motto. We don't refuse anything, but don't try to take anything from us. Menki noticed the serious look on Rio's face and continued casually. You seem to know a bit about Meteor Street, so I'll save the explanation. Once we get there, you'll see for yourself. But let me warn you now, once we're inside, don't say we're there looking for the Saint Ganbalion. If something happens, I won't be able to protect you. She turned and resumed walking through the desert without answering any more questions. Reo had no choice but to follow, helplessly. He still didn't understand much about the world around him. This passivity was starting to wear on him. He silently resolved to read more and get up to speed on the lore and reality of this world. The two continued their trek in silence. Reo wasn't in the mood to talk in such a monotonous desert landscape, and Menki, unaware that Reo had a void space to store supplies, chose to conserve water by not speaking. After a long while, something in the distance caught their attention. Dust billowed in the air, Something was approaching at high speed. Both Reo and Menki instinctively fell into defensive stances. 10 minutes later, an off-road vehicle skidded to a stop in front of them. A group of ragged people jumped out, leaving only one person in the vehicle. Their clothing was tattered, but the weapons they carried looked far more advanced than anything from the outside world. A tall man stepped forward, and Rio's gaze locked onto him. The man's face was riddled with scars, one of his eyes missing. He wore an open vest, camo pants, and a water canteen at his waist. Compared to the others, his gear looked better, suggesting he was the leader. He raised a pistol and aimed it at Reo and Menki. "What are you two doing here, nosing around this area? Talk, or I'll start shooting." Rio's right hand curled into a claw, ready to strike. But Menki grabbed his arm just as he was about to move. He turned to her in confusion, but she simply shook her head and stepped forward. "My name is Margaret. I'm a resident of District 12. I left Meteor Street and killed a few people outside, so now I'm wanted and had to come back. This is my man, I brought him with me." As she spoke, she subtly gestured behind her back. Reo instantly understood. "I'm the cooker," Reo added nervously. "I came with my wife to escape people chasing us outside. She told me everything gets accepted here. You're not gonna drive us away, right?" They'd modified their fake identities before coming, so if anyone checked, nothing would seem off. The tall man didn't respond. Instead, he turned and gestured toward the truck. Reo had already been curious about the lone figure inside. The person began typing furiously on a laptop, fingers moving so fast they left after images in the air. This surprised Reo. He hadn't even seen laptops at the Hunter Association. Everything was desktop. How was this guy using a portable computer out here? After a minute or two, the man stopped typing, closed the laptop, and leaned out the window. "Captain Jaden. No issues with their IDs. Margaret checks out, she's from District 12. Che." Captain Jaden spat on the ground. "Withdraw." The armed group lowered their weapons and began heading back to the truck. Phew. Menki exhaled unconsciously. But that was a problem. According to her story, she was just returning home. That sigh made her seem way too nervous. Jaden paused mid-step. He suddenly turned and fired his gun. Bang. 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 Rio's left arm whipped up, forming a pitch-black cluster of Nen to shield them. "Damn. We've been made," Menki growled. Then, in a flash, she vanished. The next instant, all the gunmen were lying dead on the ground, while Menki casually flipped a bloodstained kitchen knife in her hand. What?" The laptop guy stammered from inside the vehicle. Bang. He didn't have time to react. Reo lifted his index finger, a pitch-black Nen bullet firing straight through the man's forehead. He dropped his hand as the man slumped over. That bullet was a variation of Rio's Yen Bomb, a technique he'd created based on Ace's flame powers. With no proper Nen teacher, he had to improvise with simple offensive abilities. Originally, his aura had been transparent and colorless. But ever since becoming the Contractor, his aura had darkened. Surprisingly, this shadowed aura actually enhanced his Nen output. So even though Reo was an enhancement type, his powers from other categories were growing stronger as well. Why'd you go and kill that guy? I left him alive on purpose so I could question him later. Menki stomped her foot in frustration. She'd specifically spared that man to get more intel. "Well, you didn't say anything. I just shot him. No big deal. Once we get to Meteor Street, there'll be plenty of info to dig up." Reo shrugged it off. He'd learned how to keep Menki from blowing up over the past few days, and sure enough. "Humph. Guess I'll just find out more inside Meteor Street," she muttered, puffing her cheeks. With a smile, Reo walked toward the off-road vehicle. No need to keep walking when they could drive, right? 3 hours later, the car rolled out of the desert, and greenery slowly started appearing. BZZZT. Menki signaled Reo to stop the car. They would walk the last leg of the journey. Of course, it wasn't a pleasant path. They made their way through a reeking drainage ditch, enduring the stench for 10 grueling minutes before reaching a wire-covered outlet. The electrified fencing might have stopped ordinary people, but for Reo and Menki, it was nothing. With a light jump, they vaulted over it. And just like that, they stepped onto the forbidden land of Meteor Street. Chapter 78. Meteor Street, located on the continent of Audiobook, is, despite its name, far more than just a street. In reality, it's comparable to an entire country, both in terms of area and population, with roughly 10 million people living there. Officially, Meteor Street doesn't exist. Or rather, in governmental records, it's labeled as a no-man's land. To most of the world, it's a massive dumping ground. Everything unwanted, rotting furniture, broken weapons, corpses, even newborn babies, can be discarded there. Meteor Street accepts all. Because it doesn't appear in any formal registries, its residents don't need to record personal information. As a result, the people of Meteor Street are like ghosts. There are no records of them anywhere. In the original Hunter x Hunter story, many of the infamous A-class criminals from the Phantom Troupe originated from Meteor Street. This is why, when authorities tried to investigate them, they found nothing. Feel anything, coming back to a place like this after so long? On the outskirts of Meteor Street lay a massive garbage dump, an endless sea of refuse. Anything and everything imaginable could be found here. Most locals survived by sifting through the garbage, scavenging for valuable scraps. Amidst the mountainous heaps of waste, two cloaked figures moved slowly. One of them glanced at the mess surrounding them and casually addressed the other. Menki glanced at Reo. Not really. Reo scratched the back of his head, realizing, once again, that he'd probably said something he shouldn't have. But noticing several individuals nearby eyeing him suspiciously, he turned to Menki and asked. Those people over there. We're just ignoring them. Nearby, scavengers dressed in makeshift protective gear had clearly noticed Reo and Menki. Their cloaks, clean and intact, stood out like beacons among the filth. PFFT. Ignore the pickers. Anyone strong doesn't stay here. Well, now Reo knew, the scavengers were called pickers. Menki led the way, pressing forward. The people of Meteor Street had no formal education, no belief systems. The only law they recognized was strength. So when the pickers saw Reo and Menki, they instinctively evaluated the power difference. If there had been even a chance of winning, they would have attacked, ripping away everything, even their clothes and food. Maybe even their flesh. But the fact that these two walked so openly through the dump made their strength clear. The pickers understood the unspoken rule: if they were bold enough to stroll through the toxic sludge, they weren't to be messed with. Eventually, Reo and Menki passed the outer dump and arrived at Meteor Street's inner residential zone. As Reo watched the surrounding houses and pedestrians, he rubbed his head in confusion. Master Menki, you said we were here to find the Saint Caberly. But I still don't even know what that is. How am I supposed to find it? Before Reo could finish, Menki quickly covered his mouth. Tilda. Startled, Reo tensed up. His attention had been on the environment, so he hadn't seen her coming. Just as he was about to speak again, he caught the look on her face, serious. He swallowed his words. Once he went quiet, Menki looked around. When she confirmed no one nearby was paying attention, she removed her hand and leaned close to whisper. Didn't I tell you not to mention that name in Meteor Street? Seriously, if someone hears, we'll be in huge trouble. Reo nodded, realizing from her reaction that this Saint Caberly was likely a very big deal around here. All right. Now that we're on Pop Street, be extra cautious. Even though you've awakened your Nen, I haven't taught you any actual techniques yet. If you run into someone who can use their Nen, and things go south, the guild president will definitely have my head. Reo nodded again. It was true, he had Nen now, but no real idea how to use it. His raw power meant nothing against a skilled Nen user. Menki scanned the area, her eyes briefly softening with nostalgia. But a moment later, her gaze sharpened. This time, I will succeed in getting that holy lotus. Pushing aside the thought, she quickly urged Reo forward. They couldn't afford to linger. Our next move is to find Burra. He arrived here ahead of us. See this spoon symbol? That's Burra's mark. Keep an eye out when we leave, he'll leave more signs. Reo tilted his head. Even Burra was here? Just what kind of item could be so valuable that two gourmet hunters had come all the way to this hellhole for it? And Menki clearly had her own emotional baggage here. She'd already left Meteor Street once, only to return for the holy sweet lotus. There was definitely more to this than she was letting on. But where exactly are we supposed to find Burra's sign? I mean, you grew up here. You know how massive Meteor Street is. Don't tell me we're just gonna wander around aimlessly. Reo frowned as he followed her through unfamiliar streets. Menki froze in her tracks and spun around. What are you talking about? Of course we're not searching blindly. We already contacted him, he'll come pick us up. I didn't choose this identity for nothing. I lived in District 12, I know this place well. Trust me, there's no way we'll get lost. She grabbed Reo by the collar as she shouted her declaration, face flushing with determination. Reo stared at her hand gripping his shirt. Seriously, big sis, can you not get so worked up while making bold promises? And maybe look me in the eyes when you say them. Fine, whatever, he sighed. Let's just find a place to rest. If we keep wandering, it'll be dark soon. And I think you, as the local, know what happens in Meteor Street after sunset better than I do. Menki let go of his collar with a little huff and gave herself 2 quick taps on the forehead, clearly embarrassed. Chapter 79. Over the next few days, Reo and Menki searched for Burra's signal while also training together. Originally, Menki had planned to teach Reo after completing their mission, but given their current environment, the very heart of District 12 of Meteor Street, she decided it would be better to start training him right away. During one of their outings to search for Burra's marks, they passed near the Garbage Mountains and happened to spot a group affiliated with the District 12 Elder Council, the Elder Guard. Reo didn't know the name of the man they saw, but judging from the nen he was emitting, his strength seemed on par with Menki's. This man, abusing his strength, was openly hunting for attractive children, both boys and girls, to abduct and deliver to the elders. The surrounding residents didn't react. It was clear they were used to this. When the man came looking for children, they simply watched, emotionless. But just the day before, that very Elder Guard member, who had strength comparable to Menki, apparently crossed paths with someone far more powerful, and paid the price. He was killed outright, and his body was hung from one of District 12's landmark buildings as a message. Meteor Street, however, wasn't just some urban slum. While the outer perimeter was a wasteland of filth, the inner streets were surprisingly clean and orderly. The buildings were primarily black and white, constructed from decent materials. If you ignored the surrounding trash, Meteor Street could be mistaken for a normal town. But this public execution enraged the elders. Someone had killed one of their own on their own turf, and hung the body for all to see. It was a direct provocation. Tension had gripped all of District 12 ever since. Which is why Menki made the call. Reo needed training, now. The 4 foundational Nen principles are, Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hatsu. I'll demonstrate each of them for you. Watch carefully, then give it a try. In a modest little room in Central District 12, Menki stood before Reo and began to demonstrate. 10. The technique of keeping aura clinging to the body's surface, stabilizes the flow of aura and serves as a defensive layer. The stronger the 10, the tougher the defense. Though it was a basic technique, when demonstrated by Menki, Reo was astonished. The flowing energy around her seemed to suddenly stop. Like a rushing river that had been paused, her aura turned still, like a lake untouched by wind. Aura wrapped tightly around her body, sealed and unmoving. Zetsu, which suppresses one's aura flow entirely, makes the user nearly undetectable and helps recover stamina. Reo had instinctively used this once when he first awakened Nen, but hadn't been able to replicate it since. Menki's use of Zetsu was eerie. Reo could still see her clearly with his eyes, but it felt like she had vanished, no presence, no pressure. Like she wasn't there at all. Ren, which expels a greater amount of aura than usual, boosting the user's power. Menki demonstrated it with only twice the output of 10, not enough to attract attention, but just enough for teaching purposes. After all, they were still in Meteor Street. Drawing too much attention could be dangerous. As for Hatsu, it's a personalized application of your Nen, it's shaped by who you are and what you're about. Every Nen user develops their own unique ability. But that's something for later. For now, focus on mastering the basics. Reo nodded. Got it, Master Menki. He had traded his old cloak for a set of shabby clothes, freshly washed despite their worn appearance. Menki had insisted he blend in, but Reo still couldn't bring himself to wear dirty clothes. Menki had only demonstrated 3 of the 4 basic techniques. For ordinary people, even that was a lot to absorb. Reo closed his eyes, focusing intently on the feeling of each demonstration. Menki stood silently to the side, knowing he needed to find his own rhythm. Once he did, his progress would be faster and more stable. A long moment passed. 10. Reo snapped his eyes open, attempting to lock his aura to the surface of his body, freezing its flow. Though it was his first time using 10, most of his aura stopped moving, like a lake barely touched by wind. He couldn't see his aura clearly, but Menki could, and her eyes widened in shock. His 10 wasn't much different from hers. And this was his first try. With a little more practice. Reo, unaware of her astonishment, frowned slightly. He could still feel some of his aura drifting. But considering it was his first attempt, he wasn't too disappointed. It felt like an invisible layer of clothing had wrapped around him, a warm, subtle pressure. He released 10 and let his aura return to its natural state. Then he closed his eyes again, recalling the sensation Menki gave off during Zetsu, how she'd been standing right in front of him, but he couldn't feel her at all. Zetsu. Reo shut off his aura. Instantly, his presence vanished. He had used this technique once before, by instinct. Though he hadn't been able to reproduce it until now, the memory helped. This time, his suppression was perfect, not a trace of aura leaked from his body. Menki was stunned again. She had no idea he'd used Zetsu before and assumed this was his first attempt. To conceal himself so completely on the first try. Guild President. You really handed me a monster. Am I even qualified to teach someone like him? Meanwhile, Reo felt a strange thrill. His presence had become so faint that even an ant crawling across his foot didn't notice him. Menki, is this Zetsu? It feels so strange. Like, I'm completely hidden, but still at full strength. Chapter 80. Reo noticed that Menki was ignoring him, so he looked over curiously. Yes, that's right. That was Zetsu, but your execution still needs a little work. You'll get it with more practice. She quickly changed the subject. Anyway, let's drop this for now. Time to head out and look for Bura's sign. Menki had heard Reo calling out to her and hastily pretended to be nonchalant, not wanting to let him get too confident. She even blushed a little while talking nonsense to cover her embarrassment. Reo found her reaction a little odd but didn't press her on it. That day, he had practiced 2 of the 4 basic Nen techniques. After grabbing a quick meal, he was ready to head out and continue searching for Bura's sign. But honestly, after nearly a week of looking with no success, Reo was starting to wonder if Bura was even still in District 12. What if they were searching in the wrong place entirely? As he reached for the doorknob to head out, a sudden change in atmosphere stopped him cold. Menki, standing behind him, also tensed. In an instant, both of them vanished from the door and retreated into the living room. Boom! Right as they moved, the door exploded. The old wooden frame shattered and splintered, sending pieces flying into the room. Ha ha ha. Finally found you. Time to settle our score from 2 years ago. Through the smoke, a tall figure emerged, stepping on the broken wood with filthy cloth shoes, grinding the shards beneath his feet. That voice. Menki's expression darkened. As the dust cleared, Reo and Menki could see the intruder clearly: worn cloth shoes, jeans, a black vest, and 2 muscular arms crisscrossed with scars. His face was just as marked, scarred and twisted, his fierce expression making him look even more monstrous. Bella? Menki's eyes flashed with surprise. That's right, it's me, the man sneered. I've been looking everywhere for you, my dear sister. Sister? Reo stared in disbelief. That guy was Menki's brother? I thought it might be you, Menki said coldly. Her eyes narrowed, and an aura laced with killing intent slowly rose from her. This was the first time Reo had seen Menki truly angry. No matter how irritated she'd been in the past, she had never looked like this. Clearly, there was serious history between them. You actually had the guts to come back after running away. Found yourself a helper too, huh? Bella's expression twisted with rage as he sensed Menki's hostility, his own murderous aura building in response. Reo stood awkwardly off to the side, unsure of what was going on. All he could do was watch, waiting to see what would happen next. But to his surprise, both of their auras faded at the same time, as if some unspoken agreement had been made. Humph. Hiding in the center of District 12, huh? Nice spot. If you plan to rot here forever, be my guest. I'll be right here, waiting for the day you crawl out. Ha. 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 With that, Bella turned and walked away, completely ignoring Reo and Menki, as if they weren't even worth his time. But Master Menki. That guy. He doesn't have Nen, does he? Reo turned to her quietly. Now that he had awakened his Nen, he could distinguish whether someone had mastered it or not. Bella's aura was weak, indistinguishable from a normal person's. There was no sign of Nen. Menki nodded in silence, her expression clouded, and didn't speak another word. She stepped out the broken doorway without a sound, continuing the search for Burra's mark. Seeing her like this, Reo hurried after her. In her current state, it was hard to say what might happen. Once on the street, Menki still didn't speak. She just walked, her steps steady but emotionless. Reo trailed silently behind her. She seemed to wander aimlessly, yet now and then, she sharply changed direction, like she was following an invisible thread. Reo said nothing. Whatever had just happened clearly shook her. All he could do was stay close and keep her safe. Eventually, their steps took them into a nearby forest. Though it was called a forest, the area was filled with weeds and dead trees. Most of the branches were bare, lifeless stumps standing in a world drained of color. But still, Menki walked on, deeper into the woods. Her mood grew more and more somber. Reo could feel the weight in her steps and the way her presence shifted with each stride. He wanted to say something, do something, but nothing felt right. So he just stayed close. By the time they exited the forest, it was already late afternoon. The sky had begun to dim, the sun sliding behind a curtain of clouds. As they continued forward, the trees around them grew more densely packed, more skeletal. The weeds on the ground turned yellow, the decay creeping in with every step. Suddenly, Menki stopped beneath a single, strange tree. It stood out sharply against its surroundings. While all the others were dry and dead, this tree was lush, its black leaves gleaming in the dim light. It looked alive. And as Menki approached, the tree responded. Its branches trembled gently, almost like it was welcoming her. Then, slowly, the dark branches moved. They wrapped around Menki, pulling her close in a gentle, almost maternal embrace, like a mother holding her child. Chapter 81. The moment Reo saw the tree, his heartbeat quickened, and without warning, the contractor's note appeared on his right hand. Something was wrong. This was the first time the contractor's note had activated on its own, and the way the tree was holding Menki didn't seem like something a normal tree should be capable of. Whoosh! Swoosh! Reo stepped forward, but before he could reach them, two roots shot up from the ground and blocked his path. He instinctively jumped back, and the roots immediately stopped moving. Cautiously, he reached his foot forward again. Whoosh! Swoosh! Yep. That confirmed it. This tree clearly didn't want him getting any closer. And yet, Menki was being held in its embrace. Aura surged from Reo's body. He quickly activated 10, the technique he just learned, locking the aura onto his body like armor. Once his defenses were in place, he launched himself toward the tree. Bang! But just a few steps in, a kitchen knife suddenly landed at his feet, blocking his path and forcing him to halt. Reo, don't come any closer, came Menki's soft but pleading voice. Let me stay here quietly. Please. Reo froze mid-stride. That's my mother, she said gently. I just want to spend a little time with her, okay? Please. Reo didn't know what to say. The contractor's note, pulsing in his hand, made it clear, this tree was no ordinary being. It was dangerous. But still. After a moment of internal conflict, Reo nodded silently and backed away a few meters, giving them space. Swoosh. He landed lightly in the direction he'd come from, putting enough distance between himself and the tree. Sensing his retreat, Menki lowered her kitchen knife and resumed her quiet conversation with the figure holding her. Reo couldn't make out the words. An hour passed. The two women, mother and daughter, it seemed, chatted peacefully. Reo, on the other hand, was far from happy. Standing there with nothing to do, he grew increasingly bored and glanced down at the contractor's note in his hand. Ever since Reo had awakened, he could now control the note freely, no longer needing to decide whether to form contracts every time he killed someone. It made things a lot easier. He flexed his nen and formed a dark, pitch-black arm where his severed left arm used to be. It was a crude replacement, flexibility in the fingers wasn't great, but it was functional. Using the nen-formed left hand to hold the note, he began flipping through the pages with his right. After a while, he grew disinterested in the pages and turned his attention back to Menki and the tree. And then... Wait. What? Rio's eyes widened. There, cradled in the arms of the dark tree, was a woman with pink hair, the same as Menki's. Her facial features were nearly identical. That was her mother. Why hadn't he noticed her before? Only now did he see her clearly. He glanced back at the contractor's note, then returned his gaze to the woman. Snap. Reo shut the book with a sharp motion, and the woman vanished. When he looked again, she was gone. His eyes narrowed. There was still much he didn't understand about the contractor's note. Up until now, he had used it primarily for contract signing, but clearly, it had deeper functions. He reopened it, turning through the pages. The first 6 contracts still remained. Rabbit, increased agility. Fish, underwater breathing. Ant, enhanced pressure resistance. Horse, boosted stamina. Ape, strengthened physical power. Ugly fish, granted access to a void space, like a spatial backpack. As he looked at the 6 pages, a thought popped into his head. What would happen if I tore out one of these pages? The more he thought about it, the more tempting it became. Finally, he made a decision. He flipped to the second page, the one containing the contract with the fish. That contract had been formed during a test run. Its ability, breathing underwater, wasn't something he desperately needed. Using his right hand, Reo pinched the page between his thumb and index finger. Rivip. The sound of tearing echoed softly. At the same time, he felt a sensation leave his body, something intangible. A ghostly fish rose from the torn page, hovered briefly, then vanished into the air. The torn page in his fingers faded away, gradually becoming transparent, and disappeared. Then, something strange happened. The third page of the book shifted forward and replaced the second page as if nothing had been removed. The layout of the book remained perfectly intact. Was that it? Reo blinked. But of course, it wasn't that simple. A dry, fiery heat surged from deep within his body. At the same time, he felt a faint but definite increase in both physical strength and nen output. Not a huge jump, but enough to notice. I really don't understand this book at all, he muttered to himself. Just then. Ah! Minky's voice rang out. Reo's head snapped up. Something had changed. Without hesitation, he activated 10, gathering his aura, and dashed forward. Within a second, he was beside her. When he arrived, what he saw made his blood run cold. The tree's dark branches had completely wrapped around Menki, and a hollow cavity, large enough to hold a person, had formed in its trunk. It was trying to absorb her, to pull her into itself, to bind her there forever, as if to keep her and the tree, mother and daughter, together for eternity. Chapter 82. Although taking action against someone's mother might not be the most respectful thing to do, Reo knew he couldn't just stand by. The black nen arm he had formed as a replacement for his left arm raised instinctively in front of him, shielding him from the incoming branches. He rushed to Menki's side to assess her condition. But when he reached her, he found her eyes closed. She had fallen unconscious. Reo tried to pull the branches away with his right hand, but was shocked to find how strong their grip was. Despite his strength, the branches wrapped around her didn't budge. As the tree slowly pulled Menki toward its trunk, Reo reacted on instinct. A massive amount of aura surged into his right hand, forming a dense, pitch-black ball of energy around his fist. He didn't have time to think, he just threw his punch directly at the trunk of the strange tree. A deep shockwave exploded out. The dark woods roared as if struck by a hurricane. A wave of invisible force rippled outward from the impact point beneath Reo's feet. When his fist connected, a violent gust howled through the air. Boom! The impact was deafening. Reo staggered, his ears ringing from the sheer force of it. Buzz buzz buzz. Damn! What the hell just happened? He muttered, dazed. Reo still only had basic training in Ten and Zetsu. He hadn't even begun learning techniques like Ren or Hatsu, and certainly didn't understand the mysterious Nen attack he had just unleashed. He looked up, trying to see the damage he dealt. No way. To his disbelief, the tree stood completely unscathed. Not a single mark where he had struck. It was as if nothing had happened at all. SHRRK. The tree responded as if agitated. Dozens of dark branches surged toward him. Reo leapt back from Menki, narrowly avoiding the strike. But there were too many branches. Though he dodged quickly, several caught up to him midair and slammed into his body. Damn it. Even 10's not enough. These things are piercing right through my aura. Reo winced. This was only the second time he'd ever used 10, and already it was being overwhelmed. The branches tore straight through his defense and struck his body directly. There was no time to think. More branches lashed out. Reo condensed aura into his left arm and formed a Nen wall in front of him. Bang! 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 The branches slammed into the barrier with heavy, cracking thuds. Reo looked around. He was surrounded. If he didn't escape soon, he'd be caught completely. He scanned his surroundings and found a thinner patch in the web of branches. He condensed a blade of aura onto his right hand and slashed. SHRRK. Several branches were severed and dropped to the ground, twitching. Reo took the opportunity and darted toward the gap. Swoosh. He stomped hard into the ground. Boom. Dust exploded around him, and cracks spidered across the ground as he launched himself like a missile toward the open space. But whoosh! Swoosh! Tree roots erupted from the earth and speared toward him. Reo couldn't avoid them. POW. A thick root pierced through his side. Gah! A mouthful of blood erupted from his throat. He coughed violently and staggered midair. He knew he couldn't stop. He wrapped aura around his right hand again, formed it into a blade, and slashed at the root embedded in his abdomen. Crack! The root snapped and fell away. Reo stumbled backward a few meters, ignoring the stabbing pain and bleeding wound. His gaze locked back onto Menki. Damn it! I can't drag this out any longer. He clenched his teeth. Menki was almost completely enveloped by the tree now. But what could he do? That mysterious Nen blast he used earlier had been powerful, but completely ineffective against this thing. Worse, it had injured him. Just as despair began to set in. The Contractor's note reappeared, hovering in front of him. Reo's eyes lit up. Right. When I first saw this tree, the note appeared on its own. That must mean there's a way to deal with it. But as he focused, the tree began to move. It tore its roots from the ground and crawled toward him. Reo stepped back instinctively, suddenly overwhelmed by the surreal sight. The Contractor's note, still floating, began to open and flip through its own pages. It stopped on page 6, then froze. Nothing else happened. Reo's hope wavered. That's it? No answers. No reaction. Frustrated, he looked back and recalled what he had seen earlier. When holding the note, he caught a glimpse of a woman inside the tree, one who looked just like Menki. But as soon as he let go of the note, she vanished. This book can force contracts with souls. So that woman must have been in a soul state. Otherwise, why else could I only see her through the note? Chapter 83. When Reo had the thought, he suddenly felt like he'd stumbled upon the truth. His Contractor's note was a compulsory soul contract tool. It didn't matter if the other party consented, the contract would be forced. And so, a bold idea sparked in his mind. What would happen if I touched this strange tree with the Contractor's note? Reo was not one to hesitate when inspiration struck. He immediately formed a pitch-black Nen arm on his left side and used it to grasp the Contractor's note. Without wasting a second, he bolted toward the monstrous tree. The world around him blurred as he moved at high speed, wind howling past his ears. 1 second later, Reo reappeared in front of the tree. With his right hand, he brushed away the nearest branch. Then, with the Nen-formed left hand, he pressed the Contractor's note against the strange tree. Instantly, thick, black miasma burst out from the tree. A woman's anguished scream echoed through the air. Wah, la, la, la. The branches that had been writhing wildly just moments ago wilted all at once. Their leaves fell like ash, crumbling as they hit the ground. Boom. The once vibrant tree instantly withered, becoming just another dead trunk like the others in the forest. Within seconds, it dried out entirely, its limbs snapping and collapsing onto the forest floor. The final living tree in the forest had perished, its death leaving the woods even more desolate than before. At the same moment, on page 6 of Reo's Contractor's note, a figure appeared, a woman with the same face as Menki. At the same time, a message surged into Reo's mind. Mother's love, hate. Two aspects of one ability. In the love state, an indestructible invisible shield forms in front of the user, blocking all incoming attacks. It lasts for 1 second and has a cooldown of 1 hour. Menki, even if I die, even if my soul decays, I will always love you. In the hate state, a ghost-faced doll appears. Writing an enemy's name on it imprisons the target for 3 seconds, sealing all their abilities. The cooldown time is 3 days. Bella, even if I die, even if my soul decays, I will always hate you. Reo absorbed the information with quiet awe. What could Bella have done to deserve such deep hatred from his own mother, even after death? He glanced down at Menki, still unconscious. There wasn't time to dwell on it. Scooping her up, Reo turned and made his way back toward the center of District 12. As he walked, he noticed that the strength and nen boost he'd received after tearing the fish contract earlier had faded. It had only been a temporary effect. A few hours later, Reo stood in front of what remained of their house, staring blankly. The front door had been completely destroyed, smashed in by Bella earlier. And now, with the house wide open on Star Street, anyone in the area could easily walk in and loot the place. With a sigh, Reo gave up on checking the damage and instead headed for the exchange office. This place was a lifeline for Meteor Street residents. If you found something usable or valuable in the junk heaps, you could bring it here to trade for small rations of food and water. For the rulers of Meteor Street, it was a clever exploitation system, giving out basic necessities in exchange for what was essentially garbage. Occasionally, residents did stumble upon actual treasures, but even then, they would gladly trade them for food. In this place, hunger trumped wealth. Reo reached the exchange office with Mankey slung over his back. The building was considered luxurious, by Meteor Street standards, but it looked like a basic shop elsewhere. The man who ran the place was an old merchant known only as Old Jack. Reo never learned his real name. Most days, Jack lounged on a reclining chair, smoking rare cigarettes and sipping wine, luxuries nearly unheard of in this place. But today, perhaps due to the hour, he was inside a back room when Reo arrived. Hearing Reo's footsteps, Old Jack stepped out, irritation on his face, until he saw who it was. Then his scowl flipped into a grin. Reo saw the shift and curled his lip. That old man had scammed him hard. He'd paid 10 diamonds, worth millions outside, for the last house, and all he'd gotten was a modest home near the center of District 12. It was a raw deal, but on Meteor Street, all transactions went through Jack. There was no alternative. How about it? Jack asked eagerly. Did you find something good again? Let the old man see. Clunk. Reo dropped 2 bottles of red wine onto the table. Jack's eyes gleamed, already imagining them in his possession. My house got wrecked today by some guy with a grudge, Reo said calmly. Get me a new one. The wine's yours. Jack, holding the bottle now, looked ecstatic. Red wine, real red wine, was luxury on another level. For an old man near the end of his life, having 2 full bottles was almost heaven. You've got 3 options, Jack said, eager to seal the deal. Near the garbage mountain on the edge of District 12, great for scavenging. On the border between District 11 and 12, easier access to both zones, but a little chaotic. Not far from your previous place, still central, but smaller. Reo closed his eyes and considered. After a few seconds, he chose the second option. Being near both districts would help them find Burra's sign faster. The sooner they completed their mission and left, the better. This place gave Reo a lingering sense of unease. Taking the key and map, Reo carried Mankey out and headed for their new home. Even though the moon hung high in the night sky, the streets were still crowded. People here didn't rest, not when survival was on the line. As Reo exited the exchange office, dozens of eyes followed him. Their gazes were strange. Calculating. Quietly dangerous. Humph. Reo noticed immediately, but didn't react. He simply quickened his pace. It wasn't fear, it was caution. On Meteor Street, the ones who hunted at night were often not human in the ordinary sense. There was no need to draw unwanted attention. 1 hour later, Reo arrived at a small shack. It looked cobbled together, each wall a different color, the door made from mismatched scraps of metal and wood. Reo didn't care. They weren't staying long. All he needed was a roof. He unlocked the door. A musty smell greeted him, but he stepped inside without hesitation. The interior was unimpressive. Bare walls. Cracked plaster. A broken bed frame sat in the center of the room like it had been dropped there on purpose. In one corner, a pile of scorched rubble smoldered faintly. A hazard, clearly, but Reo had no complaints. If it was dry and safe, it was good enough. He retrieved a large bed from his void space, the only one that hadn't been looted earlier. The two small beds had been stolen when Bella kicked in the door, but at least the big one remained. That meant there was only one bed now. If Menki took it, he'd have nowhere to sleep. But as Reo looked at her, unconscious and still clinging to life, he couldn't help but smirk. TCH. This girl really is kind of adorable. Chapter 84. The next day, Reo was jolted awake by a sudden scream. He opened his eyes groggily and found Menki towering over him, her expression furious, and both hands gripping kitchen knives, as if she was ready to attack. Reo snapped awake instantly. He didn't know about other people, but Menki? She'd definitely follow through. Master Menki. Let me explain. He hurriedly explained everything that had happened the day before, except, notably, he didn't mention what ultimately happened to the strange tree. Humph. Menki scoffed but didn't press further. Reo considered asking her about what happened yesterday, especially about her mother, but before he could, Menki started speaking on her own. In Meteor Street, pregnant women aren't cared for. Most of them just go to the orphanage, give birth, and leave. But my mother. She raised both me and Bella herself. Reo remained silent, listening intently. The man you saw yesterday, Bella, he's my biological brother. My mother was ill, but she was a Nen user. And not just any Nen user, she was an exorcist, which is incredibly rare. Even with me and Bella as burdens, we managed to survive in Meteor Street. I thought we'd always live under her protection. But then, everything fell apart. She wanted to help both of us awaken Nen. I succeeded in 6 months. But Bella, he had no talent. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't awaken it. He started believing Mom didn't want to teach him. Even though she explained it again and again, he didn't believe her. One night, he ran away. I remember. That was the first time I ever saw my mother cry. It broke her. I promised I'd find Bella and bring him home. But he vanished. No news, no trace. My mother cried herself to sleep every night. Then, 1 year later, he came back. But not the way we hoped. Reo's brows furrowed. He had a bad feeling about where this was going. At the time, the elder of District 11 was afflicted with a curse, one that only an exorcist could remove. My mom was exhausted, she hadn't rested since Bella disappeared. Still, the elders demanded she cure him. They captured Bella and used him as bait. To save him, Mom agreed. Because of her condition, she couldn't draw on her own power. So she used the forest's vitality instead. She chose those woods to absorb energy and expel the curse. It worked. The elder was healed. Bella was released. The elders even offered Mom a seat on their personal guard. She accepted. But the moment Bella approached, he stabbed her. Menki's voice cracked. Reo instinctively reached over and pulled her into his arms, not saying a word. He just held her. After a few moments, she pulled back, red-faced, and glared at him. Reo awkwardly looked away. But thankfully, Menki didn't stay mad. She continued. Bella stabbed her right through the heart. She had just finished casting the exorcism. She was completely drained, no aura, no defenses. That knife went in like nothing. She began crying again. Reo felt helpless, unsure if he should try comforting her again. Before he could decide, Menki took the choice away. She threw herself into his arms and sobbed. Woo woo. Reo cursed inwardly. Just earlier she wouldn't let me hold her, now she dives in herself. What kind of logic is that? Menki sniffled and continued. Bella. He admitted it. He wanted Mom to be weakened. He deliberately gave her info to the elders. He got caught on purpose, to force her to act. Also she'd drain her nen. And he could kill her easily. I snapped. I beat him down with everything I had. I was going to finish it, until Mom collapsed behind me. I had to let that bastard go to rush to her. She was dying. I begged the elders to help. They refused. Told me to collect her body. I attacked them out of rage. But I wasn't strong enough. I lost. I had to run. And I never saw her again. Not even her body. She broke down again, covering her face with her hands. Reo didn't let her finish. He simply pulled her into another hug. And this time, she hugged him back tightly. After a while, Menki didn't move from Rio's arms. She just kept speaking softly. After Mom died, her lingering resentment clung to the tree closest to her, the one I went to yesterday. That's why the tree became carnivorous. Anyone who approached would be consumed. I thought I saw her spirit. And I thought if I could die in her arms too, it wouldn't be so bad. Menki looked away, embarrassed. But then, something clicked. Wait. You saved me, didn't you? Menki suddenly sat up and stared at Reo. Where's the tree? The one Mom's spirit was attached to. Reo blinked. Seriously? We were just cuddling a second ago and now this. He sighed inwardly and decided to lie. At the last second. The tree stopped. It unwrapped you on its own. Then. A woman who looked just like you appeared, same hair, same face. She handed you to me and asked me to take care of you. Once I agreed. She vanished. Menki's eyes went wide. Thud. She suddenly tackled Reo onto the bed, straddling him, her arms planted on either side of his head. You. Are you serious? Did you really see her? Reo nodded solemnly. If you're going to lie, lie with conviction. She stared into his eyes for a moment, then broke down, collapsed onto him again, and whispered something that left him stunned. You've got me. Master Menki? Before Reo could react, she gently grabbed his face. Their lips met, soft and uncertain at first. But Reo wasn't going to let such an opportunity slip. He deepened the kiss, melting the hesitation between them. Wah! Menki pulled away, flustered, and dived under the covers. A bump appeared under the quilt. Reo smirked and pulled the corner open, revealing her face. Master Menki. Whack. She yanked him under the covers too, dragging him into the blanket cocoon with her. The narrator's voice echoed faintly. Thomas the train rolled by, reminding them it was time to board. That evening, they only stopped when hunger kicked in. Reo pulled food and water from his void space, shared it with Menki, and had her clean up. Menki lay beside him afterward, drawing circles on the mattress with her fingers. Hey! What do you think people would say if they knew about us? I mean, you're still technically my disciple. Reo looked at her, unamused. She had been the one taking charge earlier, and now she was worrying about appearances. He cut her off with a shrug. Let people say what they want. If you live your life for others, it's too exhausting. Hearing that, Menki nodded softly. And this time, she didn't say another word. Chapter 85. By noon the next day, Reo had let Menki rest at home while he went out to continue the search for Burra's sign. After scouring all of District 12 with no success, he decided it was time to check District 11. What he didn't know was that the moment he stepped out of the house, something was already in motion. In a small building within District 11, a man wearing a leather jacket stood motionless in the center of a large room. Aura radiated off of him, a clear sign that this was a skilled nen user. Beep beep beep. From the corner of the room, a black phone vibrated on a dusty table. The man's brow furrowed. His aura slowly receded as he walked over and answered. Hello. Brother Bell. It's Harry Duru. A panicked voice crackled through the receiver. Bell's face darkened. What happened? The house you told us to keep an eye on, is already occupied. The guy just left it and headed toward District 11. What? Bell's grip on the phone tightened. His face hardened. I told you to get the key from old Jack. How the hell did someone else end up in that house? Explain. Now. A vein popped on Bell's forehead. He's a stranger. Came last night and picked the place at random from what old Jack offered. He must have picked it without knowing. Harry Duru's voice trembled as he tried to explain. Bell's voice dropped to a growl. Where is he now? He just left. Just stepped out of the house, heading for District 11? Should be there in about 10 minutes. Crack. Bell crushed the phone in his hand with a single squeeze. That bastard's going to learn what happens when someone takes what belongs to me. A suffocating killing intent flooded the room. Meanwhile, Reo had just finished crossing the garbage mountains on his way into District 11. Since he was new to this area, no one recognized him, and no one knew his strength. Which meant, everyone was watching him. The pickers nearby, scavengers who made their living sifting through trash, eyed Reo greedily, sizing him up for valuables. It didn't take long before one of them lunged at him. That single move was like triggering a switch. In an instant, dozens of pickers surged forward. Some brandished weapons, others came barehanded. All of them had the same wild, red-eyed hunger. Sigh. Reo let out a tired breath. He'd expected this. Every time he entered a new area of Meteor Street, someone always tried to test him. At first, he'd held back. But now, after all he'd experienced, he was done being polite. Without even using Nen, Reo reached into his void space, drew the long blade he'd received from Chairman Netero, and stepped forward. In the past few days, the endless violence of Meteor Street had begun to change him. His temperament had grown colder. Hardened. Survival here meant shedding mercy. So when the pickers rushed him, Reo didn't hesitate. 14 enemies. This'll take about 5 minutes. He walked slowly at first, then accelerated into a sprint. 2 of the smarter pickers sensed the shift and turned to run. The remaining 12 charged straight at him, thinking they had him surrounded. Weapons flew at him from every angle. Reo's sword gleamed. Shing. Clang. 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 Weapons shattered on impact, their pieces clattering to the ground. The owners reeled in shock. 1 second later, a flash of steel arced through the air. Thunk. A head flew skyward. 1 down. Reo didn't even slow. He pivoted and lunged toward the next target. That picker froze, stunned by how quickly his comrade had died. He tried to turn and run, but it was already too late. Stupid. Reo's eyes gleamed darkly. Turning your back to an enemy in battle, the fastest path to death. Thrust. His blade pierced clean through the man's heart. With one hand, Reo lifted the corpse and hurled it into another nearby attacker. Thud. The body slammed into the next target, knocking him to the ground. As the man scrambled to get up, all he saw was a blur of silver. Swoosh. Then, nothing. His last thought was of a headless corpse slumping to the ground in a pool of blood. Within 20 seconds, only 8 of the 12 pickers remained. The other 2 had already fled at the start. Now, the remaining 8 were paralyzed with fear. Impossible. One of them shouted. How can anyone this strong be at the garbage mountain? Doesn't the gang control this area? The mention of a gang caught Reo's attention. But before he could ask, the man turned and bolted. Unfortunately for him, Reo had the rabbit contract, which granted him enhanced agility. Even without Nen amplification, his speed far surpassed normal humans. Chapter 86. Reo, now missing his left arm, could no longer rely on his fists. That meant the martial arts he'd once favored were out of the question. In recent days, he'd focused on swordsmanship instead. And now, with a group of fools foolish enough to provoke him, this was the perfect chance to put his practice to use. As the hunt began, Reo sprinted through the streets, cutting down anyone who came too close. Screams of pain and cries for mercy echoed through the alleys. These scavengers weren't completely stupid, they scattered in different directions. In the end, Reo cut down 7 of the 8 attackers. One lucky soul managed to escape. After the skirmish ended, Reo flicked his bloodstained blade, sending red droplets spattering across the pavement. He returned the sword to his void space with a casual motion and resumed wandering. He had no idea where Burra's mark might appear, so he figured there was no harm in simply exploring. However, perhaps because he had killed so many this time, everyone around now stared at him with wary, fearful eyes, like he might kill again at any moment. The residents of Meteor Street might be vicious, but that didn't mean they weren't afraid of death. They were still human, twisted by survival, but human nonetheless. HxH. Reo sneered, uninterested in provoking further bloodshed. He decided to head in a different direction. He'd already searched this area thoroughly without results. As he turned into another street, he suddenly froze, then closed his eyes and listened. After a few seconds, he opened them again, sharply. Everything was silent. There were no pedestrians. The people who had been walking around earlier were simply gone, vanished from both the street ahead and the one behind. Reo immediately sensed it, a dense killing intent laced with Nen was drifting toward him. A Nen user. A moment later, a tall man in a leather jacket stepped out from a side alley. His face was dark and grim, and his aura crackled ominously. Reo, unfazed, had already activated 10, locking his aura in place and guarding against mental disruption. The man's eyes scanned Reo up and down. He was young, missing an arm, but the control of his aura was sharp. This wasn't just some scavenger. You're the one staying in the house at the border of Districts 11 and 12. The man's voice was cold and heavy. Reo narrowed his eyes. And you are? I'm the one who's going to kill you. With that, the man, Bell, thrust his hands forward. Several glowing white Nen bullets shot out, speeding toward Reo. Nen bombs? Reo raised an eyebrow. It was the first time he'd seen someone else use Nen in this way. Out of curiosity, he formed a black Nen hand with his left arm and casually reached out. The bullet struck the Nen hand harmlessly. Warm. Reo caught one of them in his right hand and examined it. It glowed faintly but flickered, unstable. HxH. This is supposed to be a bomb? He crushed it between his fingers like it was a paper balloon. Pop. The Nen bomb let out a weak burst of energy and vanished with a soft hiss. Bell's eyes widened in disbelief. He had put enough Nen into those bombs to match the power of real explosives, and yet this one-handed punk had crushed them like nothing. Reo tilted his head, then placed his right hand against his chest and mimed a gun. Bang! His index finger flicked. A black Nen bullet shot out. Bell barely had time to blink before the bullet zoomed past him and exploded behind him like a miniature missile. Boom! Mud and debris splattered across Bell's back. He flinched, ducked, and rolled out of the way, terrified of the next shot. Reo simply watched him calmly. I don't know this guy. He's not a scavenger. Looks more like someone out for revenge. But that raised a question, who would be trying to kill him? All the people Reo had fought so far were random garbage pickers. He hadn't wronged anyone important. So, with a sudden burst of speed, Reo vanished. Flash. He reappeared directly in front of Bell. His right hand turned into a palm and struck the man in the chest. Poof. Bell gasped as the air was knocked out of him, coughing up a mouthful of blood. Reo didn't let him fall. He grabbed him by the throat and held him up, calmly speaking. I'm curious. Who sent you? Because I don't have any enemies here. Bell choked, trying to respond. Reo blinked, realizing he was still strangling him. Oh, right. He let go. Bell collapsed, gasping for air, hacking and coughing violently. But Reo wasn't feeling generous. The moment Bell regained a sliver of breath. Wham! A kick sent him stumbling backward, as Reo demanded again. Speak. Who sent you? And lie to me, and I'll take your arm instead. Chapter 87. Bell was in disbelief. All this had started over a house, yet now he found himself facing a monster. All he could do was silently pray that Reo would spare his life. Trying his best to keep his voice calm, Bell offered an explanation. I swear, it was just about the house. I had my eye on a place on the border between Districts 11 and 12. I was planning to go to the exchange office in the next couple of days to claim it, but someone beat me to it. I only came here to ask. Maybe we could trade? I'd even pay for the exchange materials. Reo stared at the man suspiciously. All this? Just for a house? He wasn't buying it. I've only been living there for 3 days. And you hunted me down over that? Doesn't add up. Who really sent you? Bell was nearly in tears. He had assumed Reo was just another Nen novice and had acted without thinking. Now, reality had come crashing down, and it was far more terrifying than he'd imagined. But above all else, he wanted to survive. So he panicked and started bluffing. It was the Wild Wolf Gang. They're interested in you. They sent me to test your strength. Reo paused, considering it. That explanation was slightly more believable. It certainly made more sense than someone risking their life over real estate. The Wild Wolf Gang, huh? That's funny. Someone from the Garbage Mountain mentioned them, too. Bell hadn't expected Reo to latch onto that. He just pulled the name out of thin air, but now he had no choice but to roll with it. Why yes. The Wild Wolf Gang is one of the top 3 gangs in District 11. They oversee security near the Garbage Mountain and suppress riots. Their leader's power is said to rival that of the Elder Guards. They treat their members well. If you joined, you'd be well taken care of. Please, sir. If you'll let me go, I swear I meant no harm. Reo smirked. You want to walk away after making a move on me? Without offering anything in return? Not a chance. But there were still things he wanted to know, so he continued questioning. You say they're one of the top 3. So how many gangs are there in total in District 11? Bell swallowed nervously and answered. There are around 10 in total, but only 4 of them really matter. The top 4 control nearly all the territory and profits in District 11. The rest are just small-time factions barely scraping by. Reo raised an eyebrow. Interesting. That's quite a contrast from District 12, where the Elder Guards were the only known power. So why do gangs have this much power? Aren't the Elders supposed to run everything? In District 12, the Elder Guard is the only real authority. Bell gave a bitter chuckle and shook his head. District 11's Elder. He's still in charge technically, but he doesn't bother managing anything. That's why the gangs were able to rise up. If he cared even a little, none of them would exist. Reo nodded. That did explain the lack of structure compared to District 12. Go on, Reo said, motioning with his hand. Bell hesitated, then continued. A few years ago, the Elder here was cursed. Someone tried to exorcise it, but the process failed, only part of the curse was removed. Since then, the Elder's been disconnected. He doesn't get involved. As long as the gangs hand over their share of the money each month and don't challenge his authority, he leaves them alone. Reo frowned slightly. So that must be the curse Menki's mother tried to remove. But hadn't Menki said the exorcism was successful? Now someone else was saying it had failed. The contradiction left Reo confused, but he brushed it aside for now. He had a more urgent issue, finding Burra's mark. Without it, he and Menki couldn't proceed with their mission. Reo pulled out the symbol that Menki had given him and held it up. Want to live? Bell nodded vigorously. At this point, he'd agree to anything. Seeing the desperation in the man's eyes, Reo grinned. Perfect. Desperate men are easy to use. You've got 3 days to find this mark. If I don't find you, or results, by then, forget about living. Reo tossed the symbol onto the ground in front of him. Then, he extended his right index finger and tapped lightly over Belle's heart before finally lifting the foot that had pinned him to the ground. Belle staggered to his feet. He looked down at his chest, and noticed a small, perfectly round hole had been burned into his shirt. Panicking, he reached out to touch the spot and gasped. What did you do to me? Reo grinned wide, baring his teeth. Nothing much. Just a little tap with my nen. In truth, he had injected a thread of his dark, corrosive aura into Belle's chest. This wasn't a fatal strike, yet. Reo had tested it before. His aura could corrode things slowly, and he could control the rate. At the current dosage, the nen would eat its way to Belle's heart in 3 days. If Reo didn't remove it in time, even pulling it back afterward wouldn't stop the damage. Belle wouldn't survive. Hey hunters. Just a quick break. Hopefully you're liking this fanfic. Let's keep going. Chapter 88. Reo grinned and calmly explained his nen ability to the man before him. This is my nen ability, I can corrode anything I touch. If I don't take it back within 3 days, your heart will be eaten away by this aura. And when that happens, well, I don't think I need to spell it out. You can imagine the rest. Belle's face went pale. Reo's smile, once merely confident, now looked like the grin of death itself. Belle couldn't believe someone this young possessed such a terrifying ability. I swear, I'll find the symbol in 3 days. Please, just let me go, please take back your nen. Belle crawled to Reo's feet, begging him to retract the aura invading his chest. But Reo didn't even look at him. He simply turned and walked away, heading back toward the house. Belle remained there, collapsed on the ground, staring at Reo's retreating back in utter despair. It had been noon when Reo left to search for Burra's mark. By the time he returned to the border of Districts 11 and 12, the moon was already high in the sky. After walking for over 10 minutes, the little patchwork house finally came into view. The moment he saw it, a smile crept onto Reo's face. He was about to see Menki again. Bang! Clang! He rapped on the tin section of the door, the dull thud echoing in the quiet street. A full minute passed before the door creaked open and a head of pink hair peeked out. Yo, you're back. Did you find anything today? Their relationship had already crossed the line, and now Menki spoke more freely with him. Her cheerful expression lit up Reo's face. Her voice, slightly hoarse from their antics the day before, had a husky charm that made Reo's ears tingle. The double knock Reo had given was their agreed-upon signal. It meant he had returned safely. If a minute passed without the door opening, that meant Menki wasn't home, and Reo was free to open it himself. Honestly, Reo thought the system was a little overkill. After all, we're new here, who would bother targeting us? But when he'd suggested that, Menki's sharp glare had quickly convinced him that yes, the code was definitely necessary. I went to District 11 to look for Burra, Reo said, stepping into the house and shutting the door behind him. Met some people who might help. Menki nodded. That was good, just the two of them looking for clues wasn't enough. Any help could make a huge difference. Anyway, I brought you some food. Eat first, and we'll talk later. He glanced at the table, then scratched his head. He'd been in such a rush earlier that he forgot to leave her anything. It's fine, Menki replied casually. I handled it. Don't forget, I am a food hunter. Though she tried to sound unfazed, her voice had a hint of embarrassment, and she scratched her head with her only hand. I'll remember next time, Reo said. I'll leave enough food and water behind when I head out. My void space is packed with supplies anyway. Menki didn't reply, but her expression softened. As a food hunter, her pride wouldn't let her rely on someone else's basic rations. Still, she appreciated the gesture. Reo didn't press it. He walked over to the bed. There was no furniture besides a table and that bed, after all. Not even a chair. But this place was only temporary, so he didn't mind. After a moment, his stomach growled. He hadn't eaten all day. He looked over at Menki with pleading eyes, and then casually pulled ingredients from his void space, filling the table. Menki gave him a look but sighed and got up to cook. Half an hour later, Reo was digging into a juicy steak and sipping on a cold bottle of cola. Heaven! The weariness of the day melted away. Back when he first met Menki, he hadn't been lying, he truly loved food. That's why he'd agreed to explore becoming a food hunter, even if only in name. After eating, he decided to go out for a short walk before sleeping. He couldn't sleep right after eating, it wasn't his habit. "I'm going for a walk," he told Menki and stepped outside. Their place was situated between districts 11 and 12, far enough from the garbage mountain that the stench didn't reach them. A small blessing. But despite calling it a walk, Reo remained alert. After all, this was Meteor Street. You could never be too careful. Sure enough, he hadn't gotten far before his ears picked up the sound of a dozen people breathing nearby. They were trying to suppress their presence, but Reo, thanks to his awakened Nen, picked up on it easily. He pretended not to notice and walked straight toward the sound, curious who would be lurking near his house. Swoosh! The moment he rounded a corner, a group of more than a dozen men jumped out and blocked his path. Reo stopped and eyed them. Their clothes were in relatively good condition, not garbage pickers. Probably a gang. Leading the group was a thin man with an odd presence. Despite his frail frame, he stood at the front confidently, while the others, who were visibly stronger, stood behind him. That alone told Reo everything he needed to know. This guy was dangerous. Chapter 89. Stop. The thin man said nothing. He just stared coldly at Reo, while a cocky lackey beside him stepped forward with a sneer in his voice. Reo, however, loved dealing with arrogant fools like this. "What's going on?" Reo asked, his voice icy. The lackey shivered at the tone, but seeing the thin man standing silently behind him gave him some false confidence, and he puffed himself up again. "You know damn well what's going on. Don't forget what you did at the garbage mountain in District 11 today. That's our turf. Killing so many people so openly, are you looking down on the Wild Wolf Gang?" The name caught Reo's attention. Wild Wolf Gang. That was the same gang the guy from earlier mentioned. But something didn't add up. The man earlier said they wanted him to join. These guys looked more like they were here to settle a score. The contradiction made Reo suspicious, but he set that aside for now and focused on the ones in front of him. "Those scavengers attacked me first," Reo said coldly. "I defended myself. What's the problem?" The lackey, feeling emboldened by his numbers, sneered. "Sure, but you left survivors. That's your mistake. If they were all dead, maybe this wouldn't have been a problem. But now, because you left witnesses, we have to clean it up. So here we are." Reo chuckled. So they didn't actually want to pick a fight, but now they're here because their reputation's on the line. Classic gang mentality. Maintain the image, even if it means starting a fight they didn't want. But Reo wasn't about to let them off easy. A long knife, the one he got from Chairman Netero, appeared in his right hand. The Wild Wolf Gang members stiffened. They hadn't expected him to draw so quickly. Gulp. The cocky lackey swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this to escalate so fast. "Wait." The thin man, silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, low, and cold. "Since you paused when you heard our name, I assume you've heard of the Wild Wolf Gang. So let me make it simple. If you join us, this whole matter is forgotten. We won't hold your killings against you. What do you say?" Reo didn't respond. He just stared, expressionless. But his silence said enough. The thin man sighed, shaking his head. "It's a shame. We would have welcomed someone with your strength. But if you won't listen. His voice dropped colder. Then don't blame us for being ruthless. Get him. Before he finished speaking, the gang members charged with weapons raised. Reo smiled, eyes gleaming. Finally. A little fun. Swoosh. Reo disappeared from view with a burst of speed. The next second, he was standing in the middle of the gang, his blade already moving. A clean arc swept across the air. HxH. Blood sprayed. A stunned thug dropped, throat sliced clean through. 1. Before the others could even react, Reo spun, bringing the blade down across another man's chest. Crack. The blade cut through bone, slicing into his heart. The man fell, convulsing, as a growing pool of blood spread beneath him. 2. Damn it. What are you all doing? Get him. The thin man roared. His underlings finally snapped out of their daze. But they were already 2 men down. The first thug who had taunted Reo screamed as he raised a steel pipe and charged. Clang. The pipe struck, but Reo blocked it effortlessly with a flick of his sword. SHNK. The blade countered in a flash, piercing the man's throat. He dropped to the ground, choking out garbled sounds as blood gurgled from his mouth. 3. Now the rest of the gang panicked. They rushed Reo all at once, realizing that letting him keep the initiative was suicide. But Reo only grinned. This was exactly what he wanted. 1 by 1 was too slow. Now it was time to dance. He tightened his grip on the blade. Under the moonlight, his movements gleamed, a light blue flash swept through the street. Swoosh. A head flew clean into the air. Just like that, another died, swift and silent. 4. Reo didn't pause. He stepped forward again, moving like a ghost between the attackers. His blade never stopped moving. Chapter 90. One of the gang members, watching his comrades drop like flies, was flooded with adrenaline. He barely managed to trace the arc of Reo's blade heading his way and instinctively leapt aside. It didn't help. Reo shifted direction with a quick step, his body following effortlessly. The blade still sliced toward the man's throat. SHHK. 5. Reo muttered as he ducked a retaliatory strike, then countered by slashing at the man's weapon-wielding arm. HH. My arm. The severed limb hit the ground with a dull thud, weapon still clutched in its fingers. Reo didn't flinch. He rose to his feet and brought the blade down across the screaming man's neck. It's stupid to waste time screaming about pain in a fight. His dark eyes glinted coldly in the moonlight. Letting his guard drop because of a missing arm. Might as well have invited Reo to take his head. SHHK. Blood erupted like a fountain. 6. Reo's voice remained eerily calm, but to the remaining gang members, each number sounded like a death knell. TCH. The thin man, clearly their leader, finally had enough. Back off. I'll handle him. You should feel lucky, you're about to witness a legendary Nen ability. The remaining lackeys practically scrambled away, grateful to be spared a few more seconds. They backed off faster than they'd attacked. To Reo, they were irrelevant, just practice dummies. He didn't care if they lived or died. But now his interest was piqued. This thin man clearly had some kind of Nen ability. Whether he was strong or not. Well, Reo was eager to find out. As Reo watched, the man began to power up. His clothes lifted slightly, even though there was no wind, Nen energy gathered around him. Reo narrowed his eyes and focused his Nen vision. What he saw made him raise an eyebrow. A grotesque, hairless cat, clinging beneath the man, was biting into his body. NGH. The man looked visibly more emaciated with each second, wasting away as the cat fed on him. Then the cat turned its gaze to Reo and let out a blood-curdling meow. It wasn't cute. It was soul-wrenching. The man collapsed to the ground, convulsing. Lord Miragel. His underlings shouted, stunned by what they were witnessing. But it became clear that the meow's effect was aimed solely at Reo. A sharp ringing echoed in Rio's ears. Ugh. That actually worked. Guess I shouldn't have dropped my guard. Reo quickly wrapped himself in Enten, focusing Nen around his ears to block out further sonic attacks. The worst had passed, but his annoyance lingered. With a grunt, he launched himself forward, blade at the ready. Meow. The hairless cat screeched again, this time emitting a shockwave. Rio's charge halted for a split second. A surge of pitch-black Nen erupted from his left arm, forming a protective shield. Simultaneously, he reinforced the area around his ears. Buzz. The shockwave slammed into the shield with a vibrating thrum. But this time, Reo was ready. He pushed through, shielding active, and reached the grotesque creature. With a sharp slash, his nameless long blade swept down. Clang. The blade passed straight through the cat's body. And into the ground. Huh? Frowning, Reo struck again. Clang. Clang. Still no effect. His attacks sliced through the creature as if it were made of mist, leaving deep gouges in the earth but no mark on the cat itself. So it's intangible? Reo gritted his teeth. If his blade passed through it, then fists would be useless too. And with only one arm, his options were even more limited. As he took a moment to reevaluate, something else caught his eye. Is it getting bigger? He hadn't noticed at first, but now it was obvious. The cat had grown, nearly doubling in size since the start of the fight. Unwilling to give up, Reo tightened his grip on the blade, this time coating it in dense, corrosive Nen, the same black aura that had come from the Contractor's note. He lunged again. Boom. The slash landed with explosive force, carving a massive crater into the earth. Dust filled the air. Reo stood, breathing hard, and waited for the smoke to clear. But when it did, the hairless cat was still there. Unscathed. And now, even bigger than before. Damn it. I'm not doing any damage at all. He stared at the creature. Something was off. This wasn't just a Nen beast. This thing was feeding off energy. Maybe even off him. Chapter 91. Reo felt a headache coming on. Maybe he should have just taken out the skinny guy first, would have saved him a whole lot of trouble. But now that things had escalated this far, there was no turning back. The ugly, hairless cat that had emerged from Miragel's Nen ability seemed infuriated by Rio's repeated attacks. Its glowing green eyes locked onto him, and with a hiss, it lunged forward, claws shining with eerie light under the moon. Clang. Reo reflexively blocked the blow with his long blade, but the force behind it made him stagger back. What the hell? It's that strong? The creature's strength was unexpected. It wasn't just fast or intangible, but incredibly powerful too. And even worse, it could fly. Hovering midair, it kept slashing at Reo relentlessly. Reo held his ground, deflecting blow after blow, but the prolonged defense was draining. This can't go on. He noticed something else, too. The creature was still growing. Its body had nearly doubled in size since the fight began, and its green eyes now glowed brighter, more intelligent. At first, it had only howled and defended its master, but now it was taking initiative, attacking Reo on its own. If it keeps getting smarter, there's no telling what else it'll evolve into. While Reo was locked in defense, the dark Nen aura around his left arm began to shift. Gradually, it took the shape of a giant net. Reo narrowed his eyes. He studied the cat's attack pattern, hoping to find a weakness. The cat swiped again and again, mechanical, repetitive. There. Reo noticed that after every third strike, there was a tiny pause, less than half a second, but enough for someone like him. He didn't act immediately. He tested the pattern again. Swipe. Swipe. Swipe, pause. Swipe. Swipe. Swipe, pause. It was real. Good. I only need that half second. Reo adjusted his position slightly, the net on his arm tensing in anticipation. The creature lunged at him again. Swipe. 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 Now. With a sharp flick, the Nen net shot forward, wrapping around the cat just as it paused. Meow. Meow. The creature shrieked and thrashed violently inside the net, but Reo didn't let up. He fed more Nen into his left arm, and the net transformed into a solid black Nen sphere, enclosing the cat entirely. That should hold it. Now that the monster was contained, Reo turned his attention to the unconscious Miragel and the remaining thugs. He didn't waste time. A sharp step forward, a few white arcs flashing through the air. And the goons dropped dead, clutching their throats before collapsing. Reo didn't even bother extracting their souls. After many kills, he'd realized most average people didn't offer useful talents. It was always just minor boosts to eating or endurance. But Nen users. They might be different. Reo approached Miragel. Without hesitation, he raised his blade and slashed. SHHK. Miragel awoke instantly with a cry of pain. He looked up in disbelief, blood spilling from his chest. He had thought his Nen ability made him untouchable. His skeletal hands reached out toward Reo in desperation. Reo didn't even flinch. A few seconds later, he summoned the Contractor's note. Miragel's soul appeared on page 7. 2 lines of text floated into Reo's mind. 1. Barren Nen talent. Obtain Miragel's low-quality Nen potential. 2. Nen Phantom. Summon a custom Nen beast with the following traits. Extraction, leeches energy from a target during attack. While extracting, the beast cannot be attacked. Visual sharing, links sight with the user. Duration, 3 minutes. Cooldown, 30 minutes. Reo scoffed at the first option. No way he was downgrading his talent. But the second one? Not bad. He selected Nen Phantom without hesitation. Miragel's silhouette etched itself onto page 7 of the Contractor's note. Then, Reo activated the new ability. A swirl of dark Nen exploded from his chest, gathering in front of him into a floating, pitch-black mass. He had a moment to choose its form. Something small, nimble, easy to maneuver, stealthy. A bee. That'd work well for surveillance. As the thought solidified, the Nen mass shifted. 5 seconds later, a sleek black Nen bee buzzed to life. Reo smiled and focused on it. Let's test this shared vision. Suddenly, he was seeing 2 views at once, his normal perspective, and another, from the bee hovering in front of him. Weird. But manageable. Controlling the bee, he made it fly upward. The view shifted. Suddenly, Reo was seeing himself from a bird's-eye perspective. The dual vision was disorienting at first, but after a few minutes, he began to adapt. Yeah. This will come in handy. He grinned. Now he had eyes in the sky, and another tool to keep surviving Meteor Street. Chapter 92. After experimenting with the Nen beast for a while, Reo dismissed it. The view shifted back to normal, and surprisingly, he didn't feel disoriented. He was already getting used to the dual vision ability. He had just gone out for a walk after dinner, but unexpectedly ran into members of the Wild Wolf gang. And walked away with a practical new ability. A welcome surprise. Reo shook the long blade in his hand, flicking the blood off in a crimson arc. Then, he retrieved a bottle of water from his void space, poured it over the blade, and ripped a cloth from Miragel's corpse to clean it. This sword, borrowed from President Netero, was far superior to regular weapons, but it wasn't exactly a legendary treasure. So Reo had yet to name it. In fact, if he hadn't been worried about the blood dirtying other items in his void space, he wouldn't have bothered cleaning it at all. With the blade clean, Reo rinsed off the remaining blood from his body. He wasn't a neat freak, but he disliked being covered in someone else's blood. No matter how hard he tried, after every fight, he always ended up with at least 1 or 2 splashes on him. That, more than anything, annoyed him about life on Meteor Street. After cleaning up, he began walking home. Half an hour later, following the same knock code, Reo waited a minute before the door opened. Minky peered out, and her eyes narrowed immediately. Even though Reo had washed off all the blood, the scent still lingered faintly. "You got into trouble again, didn't you? I knew I shouldn't have let you go out at night," she said, pinching her nose in mock disgust. Reo knew why she was complaining. They were sharing a bed now, and the thought of sleeping next to someone reeking of blood wasn't exactly appealing. With a sigh, Reo decided to take one for the team. He grinned as he stepped closer. "Master." Whop. And so, in the quiet night, someone's girl cried, and someone's boy howled. Over the next 2 days, Reo trained with Menki. He had already learned entanglement and zetsu, 2 of the 4 core nen techniques. The third, ren, was straightforward, but mastering hatsu, unique abilities, was proving to be a challenge. Normally, one's hatsu aligned with their personality and natural fighting style. For Reo, that would have been close-range combat, but after losing his left arm, his usual Muay Thai techniques became difficult, even dangerous. While he could form a nen arm, it lacked the flexibility for precise strikes. After multiple discussions with Minky, they decided to temporarily put his hatsu development on hold. Instead, he would focus on mastering other nen skills first, and revisit hatsu once he had a clearer direction. Ordinary students might struggle with such an approach, but Reo was different. With his overwhelming nen reserves and absurd cultivation speed, it posed no issue. He originally wanted to study multiple advanced techniques at once, but Menki, ever the strict teacher, shut that idea down immediately. His foundation, she said, was still too unstable. So for the time being, Reo alternated between refining his nen control and practicing basic swordsmanship. Even though he could already kill efficiently with a blade based on instinct, Menki insisted on drilling fundamentals. That day, Reo was training outside. Ha! Hya! Sweat poured down his bare back as he swung his sword beneath the sun. Each motion sharp, precise, evidence of disciplined repetition. Suddenly, as he struck mid-swing, a strange sensation coursed through him. He hadn't activated nen, but it gathered around the blade on its own. Is it resonating? Just as he was about to focus on that feeling. Sir! Sir! I found the sign! I found it! The shout cut through his concentration. Reo turned, annoyed. A familiar-looking man in a leather jacket came jogging over. Wait! That guy! You! Who are you again? Reo asked, squinting. Sir! I'm Bell, the one you asked to find the Burra symbol 2 days ago. You remember that, right? Reo snapped his fingers. Ah, right. Balloon boy. He scanned Bell up and down. Didn't hear from you, thought you were dead. Bell laughed awkwardly. No, still alive. Barely. And yes, I found it. The symbol. We discovered several at the border between districts 10 and 11. I ordered my men to stay and guard them while I rushed here to report. As he spoke, Bell's voice trembled. If Reo had pulled back his shirt, he would have seen the exposed white of bone where his chest was corroded. The pain was excruciating, but survival was a strong motivator. Reo's brows furrowed. TCH. We've been combing the 12th district this whole time. Who would have guessed it was right between 10 and 11? But there was no point dwelling on it. He wiped the sweat from his chest with clean water and called out toward the house. Menki. We've got news about Burra, let's go check it out. With that, Reo turned to change out of his soaked training clothes. No way he was going on a mission wearing something sticky and drenched in sweat. Chapter 93. Just as Reo turned around, he caught Bell staring at the water bottle in his hand with wide, greedy eyes. See clear water? The most precious resource in all of Meteor Street, and you're using it to rinse off? Bell gasped in disbelief. What a waste. Even with death hanging over his head, Bell couldn't help but lament Reo's wasteful behavior. On Meteor Street, clean water was rarer than gold. The garbage mountains had long polluted the groundwater, so most residents drank contaminated liquid just to survive. Only the elders and their guards ever had access to water this clean. Watching Reo pour it so casually over a blade, Bell could barely contain his envy. Reo, catching his look, sighed and tossed a bottle of water over without a word. Bell nearly wept with joy, clutching it like a holy relic, while Reo turned and headed back into the house. Half an hour later, Reo and Menki followed a noticeably cheerful Bell toward the border between Districts 10 and 11. As they moved through the back alleys and rubble-lined paths, residents and scavengers they passed looked at Bell with wide eyes. That man, smiling like that. Something about it chilled them more than usual. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they reached their destination. Bell waved over a subordinate who'd been stationed nearby, then pointed out the mark Reo and Menki had been seeking. Menki leaned in to examine it closely. After a moment, she nodded to Reo. "Well done, Bell. Congratulations, you get to keep living." Reo gave him a nod. "Come here. I'll remove the nen." Bell's eyes lit up. Despite the pain in his chest, he ran over like a child promised candy. "You really mean it, sir? You'll lift it?" Say what you want about Reo, but when he made a promise, even after killing someone, he kept it. He said if Bell found Burra's symbol, he'd let him go. And Reo was a man of his word. "There's still time left," Reo said casually. "If I waited any longer, I might not be able to remove it even if I wanted to." Bell practically threw himself at Reo's feet and tore open his shirt. Beneath it, the flesh was burned away, bone faintly visible. "You, gross," Menki cringed. "Reo, what did you do to him?" Reo shrugged, a little embarrassed. His nen ability had turned corrosive after merging with the Contractor's note. He hadn't meant for it to become so grotesque, but it worked. And it was effective. Seeing that he wasn't going to explain, Menki waved it off. She'd just been curious. Reo placed his hand over the corroded area. Dark, murky nen condensed around his fingers, then gently drew out the lingering energy. Bell gasped with relief. It wasn't much nen, but because of its corrosive nature, it had done real damage. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have harmed the nen user at all. Now that they'd located the symbol of Burra, Bell had served his purpose. Reo waved him off like discarded scrap. Once Bell and his crew were gone, Reo turned to Menki. "Well? Did you figure out anything?" Menki nodded. And then shook her head. Reo raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "I can tell that Burra was nearby," she explained. "But I don't understand what this specific combination of symbols means." She motioned toward the sign. Reo followed her gaze. It was a simple carving, a knife and fork crossed over a spoon. Reo scratched his head. "Huh. Typical food hunter. Even his symbols look like tableware." Menki sighed. "The spoon means I am here. The knife means danger or enemies. The fork means I'm injured." "But normally," she continued, "Burra separates those messages. This is the first time I've seen all three together." She seemed clearly bothered by it, her hand anxiously ruffling her hair. But a moment later, she took a deep breath and composed herself. "I'll teach you a new technique, an advanced nen extension." She closed her eyes, concentrating. A second later, she opened them, and a surge of nen burst outward from her body. "This is Ren, one of the 4 core techniques. It floods the body with nen and expands its presence. But what I'm about to show you is a more advanced combination." She clenched her fists, focusing. "This is called N, a fusion of entanglement and Ren. It forms a field of nen around the user. Anything that enters that field can be sensed instantly. I can maintain a radius of 10 meters," she added. If I search carefully for a few days, I can definitely find Burra. Reo twitched. A few days like that? You'll drop dead from exhaustion. Still, the technique intrigued him. Reo began analyzing what Menki had just done. So N is a fusion of entanglement and Ren. He'd already mastered entanglement and Zetsu, and he was familiarizing himself with Ren. If he could merge the two, maybe he could replicate N as well. Still, it wasn't going to be easy. It might take time. But if it meant finding Burra faster, and keeping Menki from burning herself out, then it was worth it. Chapter 94. Reo first recalled how Lena had used N just moments ago. Do you first use 10 to stabilize your aura, then use Ren to expand it in a burst, forming a circular range of perception? Once he remembered the process, he decided to try it himself. Alright. First, 10. The aura around Reo's body stopped flowing, becoming as still as stagnant water. Next, he used Ren to erupt his aura outward and attempted to shape it into a circular field. A massive dark aura suddenly expanded from his body, spreading out in a radius of 100 meters. And immediately shattered. TCH. Was it too much aura at once, or was it uneven? Reo began analyzing the cause of his failure. He didn't notice Lena beside him, staring in open disbelief. Okay. Repeat the process, but this time spread it out more evenly. Evenly. Reo murmured to himself and prepared for another attempt at N. This time, with the prior experience, he didn't move slowly like before. Instead, he activated 10 and Ren simultaneously. N. A massive surge of Reo's aura burst outward, and in an instant. Boom. There was a shockwave in the air. A circular field of dark aura, dense and clearly defined, spread out with a radius of 200 meters. No way. That range. It's absurd. Lena was once again stunned by the sheer scale of Reo's aura. She'd already seen the extraordinary density of his aura when he awakened, but now, only half a month later, the volume had increased exponentially. If her aura was a 10, Reo's now felt like a 50. A 5-fold difference. In just half a month. That's insane. Everything within this massive radius was instantly perceived by Reo, Lena nearby, Belle hiding behind a building, the residents in nearby shacks, the scavengers combing through the garbage heaps. And most importantly, Burra, seriously injured and buried beneath the trash mountain. I've found him. Reo's eyes snapped open. He kicked off the ground, his feet infused with aura, and vanished in a blur. Boom. The moment Reo disappeared, the residual shockwave whipped Lena's pink hair backward. Crash. Reo overshot his mark by a wide margin, smashing directly into a nearby building. Cough, cough. He choked on the dust stirred up by the impact and hacked a few times before finally recovering. He turned back to where he meant to land, nearly 100 meters away. Because he had already activated 10 and Ren for N, Reo had unconsciously charged his legs with aura when he jumped, resulting in an enormous boost to his movement, far more than he anticipated. Seeing the massive gap he'd misjudged, Reo rubbed his forehead in frustration. I still don't fully understand how to control Nen yet. There have already been several accidents like this. I really need to learn more advanced techniques from Lena soon. Lena, who had rushed over after hearing the explosion, saw the human-shaped crater in the building behind Reo and his soot-covered face. PFFT. She couldn't hold back her laughter. Reo was still brushing dust off himself when he heard her laugh. Turning around, he saw Lena giggling uncontrollably, her chest bouncing with each chuckle. He frowned. I'm only messing up because no one's properly taught me how to use these abilities. All I've learned is 10, Zetsu, Ren, and now N. When I saved you in the forest, I accidentally channeled aura into my punch and the strength went through the roof. I had no idea that would happen. And then, while practicing my sword technique the other day, I focused my aura into my blade and the power increased dramatically. But no one told me anything about that either. Reo vented all his recent misfires caused by his lack of Nen knowledge. After all, this was Meteor City, dangerous encounters could happen at any time. A mistake in the middle of a fight could be fatal. Lena, who had been laughing, suddenly looked a bit sheepish. She rubbed the back of her neck, her expression apologetic. Reo, it's not that I didn't want to teach you. I can use these advanced applications, sure, but I'm not very good at explaining them. Most instructors at the Hunter Association only teach the 4 major principles, Ten, Zetsu, Ren, Hatsu. Once you learn those, you're considered ready to go solo. Rio's face darkened. It was true, in the original Hunter exam, Dawn and the others only learned the basics before being sent off on their own. More advanced techniques like Gyo, In, Shu, and En were learned later, like on Greed Island. Lena wasn't much older than him either, and she'd only been using Nen for 2 years. It was unfair to expect her to be a perfect teacher. Still, I'm not asking you to give me a full lecture. Just show me the technique once and explain the principle, I'll figure out the rest. You could at least tell me the names and functions of the advanced techniques. Reo stepped closer, looking at her seriously. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. You're not wrong. With how fast you're progressing, just watching might be enough. Okay, I'll show you all the basic advanced applications I know, tomorrow. Deal, Reo said with a satisfied smirk. Chapter 95. Hearing Reo say this, Lena remained in a state of confusion. Right. Reo only needs to see a technique once or twice before he gets the hang of it, doesn't he? As long as he learns the application techniques, practicing them over time would quickly translate into combat-ready proficiency. To be fair, it wasn't entirely Lena's fault. This was her first time acting as a mentor to a hunter candidate, and she'd approached it entirely with her old mindset, not factoring in Rio's unique talent. In the past few days together, Lena had come to realize that aside from a lack of knowledge on Nen techniques, Rio's strength had already far surpassed hers. Whether or not they could safely leave Meteor City after completing their mission might very well depend on his power. Having thought it through, Lena decided to teach Reo all of the remaining Nen application techniques that evening. In that case, I'll go ahead and teach you the rest of the application techniques as soon as possible. That way, you can strengthen your current base. Reo nodded, satisfied. So that was the issue, she hadn't meant to withhold knowledge, she just didn't consider how quickly he could learn. Nothing serious. With the Nen training plan sorted out, Reo returned his focus to Burra, who was still trapped under the garbage heap. He relayed Burra's current state to Lena. I just used N to pinpoint Burra's location. He's buried under that garbage mound and seriously injured, unconscious. Lena nodded at the report but wasn't entirely surprised. In a place like Meteor City, even pro-hunters weren't safe from sudden ambushes. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of opponent could push Burra into hiding in a trash heap. After filling Lena in, Reo led her toward the mountain of garbage that buried Burra. It was only about 100 meters away, so it didn't take long for the two to arrive. This is it. Lena, wait here. Reo patted her on the shoulder before leaping forward and disappearing into the trash pile. Of course, Reo wasn't reckless. The moment he approached, he activated N. This time, he condensed his N to a radius of just 50 meters to increase precision, but even that was considered huge by Lena's standards. Following the signal from N, Reo reached the spot directly above Burra, but the area was completely buried. Digging through it by hand would take forever, unless he used something special. His eyes lit up. The aura from his left arm, of course. Without wasting time, Reo released Black Nen from his left arm, shaping it into a massive net that scooped up the garbage. Thanks to the flexibility of Nen constructs, he could freely adjust its size. In one scoop, he cleared nearly a third of the trash above Burra. He tossed the garbage aside and reinforced the remaining mound with his right-hand Nen to prevent cave-ins. After 4 full scoops, Burra's body became partially visible. Reo formed a massive nen hand and gently pulled him free. Judging by his closed eyes and battered state, Burrow was completely unconscious. No wonder he didn't react despite all the noise I made digging him out. Reo didn't have any healing skills, so he brought Burrow back to Lena to see if she could help. When Lena saw Burrow's condition, wounds from both blades and claws, she was visibly shaken. It looked like at least 2 different types of enemies had attacked him. But Lena, a gourmet hunter, specialized in hunting and preparation, not healing. Her nen techniques were tailored for capturing prey, not treating injuries. Reo sighed, then turned his attention to Belle, whose location he'd already sensed with N. Swoosh. In a flash, Reo disappeared and reappeared in front of Belle. Belle had spent the past few days trying to stay close without being noticed. Now that Reo had taken back the corrosive nen, he was out of danger and curious, what exactly was that symbol he had been ordered to find? Unfortunately for him, Reo noticed. When Reo suddenly appeared in front of him, Belle shrieked and fell flat on his back. Gah! Reo didn't bother with threats this time. His tone was casual, almost bored. Get me some medicine. I don't care how. The reward is 1 bottle of clean water. Then he turned and vanished again, ignoring Belle's stunned, and ecstatic, expression. Back at the garbage heap, Reo returned to Lena's side. She didn't ask questions. After spending the last several days with Reo, she'd gotten used to his unpredictable behavior. Since Burra needed a safe place to recover, they decided to bring him back to the hut at the border between Districts 11 and 12. It was remote enough to avoid unnecessary attention and quiet enough to treat his injuries in peace. Chapter 96. When Reo and Menki returned to the house, it was already dark. On the way back, the scavengers from the garbage mountain all stared at Burrow on Rio's back. With such a large body, he could feed them for several days in Meteor City. That's right, people in Meteor City resort to cannibalism to survive. When Reo first saw it, he was disgusted for an entire day. But after seeing it repeatedly, he gradually got used to it. Of course, getting used to it doesn't mean he accepted it. Reo would never eat human flesh. Facing their greedy stares, Reo didn't say a word, he just unleashed the killing intent he'd accumulated. Before he crossed into this world, Reo had taken part in countless underground fights. Even though he later trained in Tai Chi and suppressed his bloodlust, it didn't mean he couldn't release it. Especially now, after killing so many would-be attackers during his days in Meteor City, Rio's killing intent had become even more intense than before. These people, who bullied the weak and feared the strong, were instantly silenced. They watched quietly as Reo and Menki passed by. Reo took the special house key from his storage space, unlocked the door, and tried to carry Burra inside, but Burra's size made it impossible. Left with no choice, Reo dismantled the doorway entirely. Only then could Burra be brought in. But that wasn't the end of their problems. As they arrived home, the overwhelming stench on Burra finally hit them. The reason was obvious, he had been buried under layers of garbage, and the smell had permeated his entire body. Now that he was indoors, the odor became suffocating. Even Menki, born and raised in Meteor City, couldn't endure it. The stink that usually dispersed in the open air was now trapped within their home. Even without the door, the foul air clung to every corner of the room. Just as Reo and Menki were troubled by this, Bell, their glorified errand boy, arrived with medicine. His timing was perfect. "Bell," Reo said with a smirk, "I've got another important job for you. You'll be paid in clean water, twice the amount as before." Before Bell could even set down the medicine, he practically burst with excitement. "Don't worry. I'll do it." He hadn't even heard what the job was, but he agreed right away. Reo raised an eyebrow, amused. "You saw that man earlier, he's a companion of mine. He's injured and needs to be cleaned up. That's your job." Bell was a bit confused as to why such a simple task would fall to him, but at the mention of clean water, he instantly agreed again. "No problem. I'll take care of it. At this point, Bell had completely thrown away any sense of dignity he once had. He was wholly subservient to Rio's demands. Humph hum, Reo hummed as he made space for Bell to enter. With 4 people crammed into the room now, including the massive burro, it was already tight. Bell stepped in. And was instantly hit by the stench. He staggered back, nearly vomiting. The sheer odor almost made him pass out on the spot. For a second, Bell hallucinated that someone was waving to him from across a river. Smack! Reo slapped him awake. Bell stared at Reo in silent despair, but Reo simply placed 2 buckets of water in front of him and told him to get to work. With that, Reo and Menki left the room. Neither wanted to watch the horror that was about to unfold. Outside, Reo stood thinking. The house was completely trashed thanks to Burra. It was uninhabitable now, and they needed a new place. That meant going to old Jack at the exchange office. But someone had to stay behind and guard Burra. They couldn't risk leaving Bell alone with him. Hearing Rio's reasoning, Menki agreed and volunteered to go. After several days cooped up, she was more than happy to get out. For someone with her personality, staying indoors was torture. So, when Reo mentioned the exchange office, she leapt at the opportunity. Reo didn't care who went. He simply pulled 2 bottles of red wine from his void space and handed them to her. That would be more than enough to persuade old Jack. After stuffing the bottles into a nearby trash bag, Menki waved and set off. Reo watched until her figure disappeared from sight. Then, with time to spare, he pulled out his nameless long blade and began to practice swordsmanship under the moonlight. At the border between the 11th and 12th districts of Meteor City, a lone man stood beneath the night sky, training diligently. Sweat glistened on his skin as the blade sliced through the air, again and again, his expression focused and resolute. Chapter 97. Reo didn't know how much time had passed, but Bell finally finished cleaning and bandaging all the wounds on Burra's body. At that moment, Bell stood in front of Reo with a pale face, clearly waiting for something. Reo knew exactly what that look meant. Thud thud. Reo tossed 2 bottles of water at Bell. Bell reacted quickly, catching one in each hand and holding them like treasure. Reo had calculated this reward for both finding medicine and helping clean Burra's wounds, so he was being generous. For Reo, it was just a good mood. For Bell, it was a windfall. Bell, forgetting the despair he just endured, left beaming with joy. Reo didn't pay attention to Bell's departure, his mind was now on Lena. The house was only about an hour away from the exchange office. Although Reo hadn't timed Lena's absence exactly, he knew that more than an hour had passed. That alone made Reo uneasy. When he first arrived in Meteor City, he observed that the members of the Elder's Guard had power roughly equal to Lena's. And someone of Rio's strength could easily defeat them. But Lena was still healing and might be in danger. Unfortunately, Reo couldn't leave. Burra was still in critical condition inside the house. That's when Reo remembered the Nen Beast, shadow ability he had acquired. Perfect timing. Nen Beast, shadow. A massive pitch-black aura surged from Rio's body, converging into a familiar form, a dark, bee-shaped Nen Beast. Reo linked his consciousness with the beast and sent it flying toward the exchange office. 1 hour later. As the Nen Beast flew overhead, scenes of pickers, garbage heaps, and Meteor City residents passed beneath it. No. Not her. Damn it, not this one either. Reo scanned below through the bee's eyes, searching for Lena's figure among the crowd. But everyone he saw was the wrong person. His anxiety grew. Then, he spotted her. That's her. Lena was being chased by several people in white cloaks. Her clothes were torn, barely clinging to her body. Her right arm was clearly broken, her limp stride screamed of a leg injury, and the signature long pink hair was mostly gone, cut off. She was barely able to run. Damn it. Reo snapped. Lena was his woman now, and these bastards had hurt her like this. His anger surged. Pitch-black nen burst from Reo's body. He drew the unnamed long blade from his storage ability, enveloping the blade in dense aura. He focused his energy into his legs while only maintaining minimal defense around his torso. Then, he squatted. Muscles, swollen with nen, tensed. And he launched. Boom. The ground cracked apart beneath him like spiderwebs. Shockwaves spread outward, kicking up garbage and hurling debris into the air. A translucent ripple pulsed through the sky from the speed of his launch. Meteor City's residents felt a gust of wind, no, a hurricane, blow past them. Many were lifted into the air, casualties of Reo's raw velocity. But Reo didn't care. His aura-enhanced eyes tracked Lena. In under a minute, he covered the full distance and crash-landed near her, encased in a black aura cocoon. Boom. The ground quaked. Dust and dirt exploded into the air. Lena, battered and near collapse, thought the noise was enemy reinforcements. Her heart sank. But then, she saw the familiar silhouette wreathed in dark nen. Hope bloomed in her heart. Tears welled in her eyes. She stumbled toward him. But Reo couldn't bear to let her come to him like that. In a flash, he appeared in front of her. With a gentle sweep of his left arm, shrouded in black aura, he caught her in an embrace. Lena. Don't worry. I'm here. Only a few words, but they pierced her heart like an arrow. Even in pain, even wounded and humiliated, her tears flowed as she collapsed into his arms, sobbing like a child. She wasn't alone anymore. But the enemies weren't going to wait. Several white-robed men rushed toward them, one of them, the apparent leader, remaining behind to support with nen abilities. Knives, whips, batons, pistols, all came flying toward Reo. He gently set Lena down and turned to face the incoming attacks. Mother's love. Ding. 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 An invisible shield blocked the barrage. Then, Reo vanished. He reappeared next to a whip wielder and cleaved his head clean off. 8. One of the white-robed men shouted, but too late. Clang. Reo's blade deflected a bullet, and then he was on the shooter, designated number 3. Before the man could react, his pistol and left arm were gone, cleaved off by Reo's blade. 3 other attackers closed in from behind, throwing debris and trying to recover number 3. Meanwhile, a flash of white light enveloped him, healing nen. But the arm didn't regenerate. The granulated tissue turned black and began to rot. That was the terrifying thing about Reo's nen, it corroded everything it cut. Number 3 gritted his teeth in silence, refusing to cry out. But Reo didn't care for his pride. With one clean stroke, Reo stabbed through number 3's chest and heart. The long blade was withdrawn with a pleasant squelch. He then kicked number 3's body into his allies, blood spraying across the air like a crimson arc. 3. Damn it, he's dying. One of the men screamed, clutching the dying number 3. The attackers faltered, but Reo didn't hesitate. He appeared behind their healer. Slash. The blade met something solid, resistance. Not good enough. Slash. The second strike broke through. The man tried to heal himself, too late. Blood sprayed from his severed throat. Contractor's note emerged in Reo's hand. A new silhouette appeared on page 8. Reo's mind filled with 2 options. Low-tier nen talent. Hope of the dying, gradually heals injuries. Healing rate scales with nen. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Usable 3 times per day. Without hesitation, Reo selected the second. He turned to Lena, still injured. Hope of the dying. A black-tinted white light shot from his hand and enveloped her. Her injuries began to heal rapidly, closing within seconds. The 3 attackers, still running toward him, froze mid-step, stunned. They'd seen the healing ability before, but never at this level. Now, facing a foe who could use their comrade's ability even better than they could. Fear overtook them. They turned and fled. But Reo wasn't the kind to let them go. TCH. Fools. He vanished again and reappeared behind one of the runners. Slash. The sword bit into his spine, and the man dropped like a rock. Hey hunters. Just a quick break. Hopefully you're enjoying this fanfic. Let's dive back in. Chapter 98. Reo ignored the corpses at his feet and instead locked eyes on the two white-robed men fleeing in opposite directions. Beast shadow. A surge of pitch black aura burst out from his body, gathering before him. Moments later, a hunting dog-shaped Nen beast appeared in front of Reo. Not wanting to risk either enemy escaping, he changed the form of the beast shadow and ordered it to pursue one of the runners. Reo himself shot toward the other. He quickly closed the distance to the man wielding a mace, his Nen-enhanced feet carrying him forward in a blur. Just as he raised his blade to strike, the man rolled out of the way at the last moment, barely dodging the attack. Not only that, the white-robed man seemed to realize he had no hope of escape. He got up and charged Reo with the mace. Reo noted the faint Nen aura coating the weapon and scoffed. He didn't even bother to block. Clang. The mace hit Reo square in the chest, but he didn't budge. In the next instant, Rio's blade came down, slicing through the mace, and the man's right arm along with it. Arg! The man screamed in agony as blood sprayed from the stump. But Reo didn't flinch. You people weren't showing any mercy when you went after Lena, he said coldly. Slash. A quick strike to the neck finished him off. Without even glancing back at the now twitching body, Reo turned and dashed toward the other white-robed man, who was still entangled with his beast shadow. The man had given up trying to shake the Nen beast off and was instead dragging it behind him, struggling to move forward. Reo didn't even need to run this time. He simply walked over, caught up in moments. He threw his nameless long blade aside, flicked off the blood, and stored it back in the void space. Then, standing before the man, he calmly formed a fist. Wham! A solid punch landed in the man's gut. The white-robed man's eyes bulged from the pain, but Reo wasn't finished. He wrapped the man's limbs in Nen from his left arm, tore a piece of his clothing, and shoved it into his mouth. Then he grabbed him by the front of the robe and began punching him repeatedly. Bam! Say it. Who sent you after Lena? Bam! Still won't talk? I'll beat you to death. The man whimpered through the fabric stuffed in his mouth, refusing to speak. Lena, who had been watching everything, felt complicated. Reo had gone out of his way to capture the man alive, only to torture him without giving him a chance to speak. But Lena also felt warmth in her chest. This was Rio's way of avenging her. Still, they couldn't stay here. There could be more enemies coming. She cleared her throat and spoke up. Hey! Reo, enough. If we keep standing around here, someone else might show up. Bring him back to the house, we'll interrogate him there. Reo blinked. Master Lena, you want in on this too? No worries, this guy's mouth is tight, but I'll break him eventually. Lena blushed at the way he still called her Master Lena, even after everything between them. But she quickly composed herself. Let's just go. The longer we wait, the worse it could get. Reo nodded, then knocked the man unconscious with a final, well-placed punch. They began dragging the man back toward the small house on the border of the 11th and 12th districts. But as they walked, Lena looked around at the devastation left in Rio's wake, and her stomach churned. Our Reo. Don't tell me this was all you're doing. The clean streets of the district were barely recognizable. Blood stained the ground in countless places, while debris from shattered homes and garbage from upturned piles were strewn everywhere. Amid the mess, dismembered bodies and scattered limbs lay in plain sight. Most of the corpses were elderly or children, those too weak to flee or defend themselves. Even someone as hardened as Lena, who had lived in Meteor City all her life, struggled to look at the carnage. But she also understood, this was survival. Strength ruled here. Reo didn't answer. He simply nodded once, then reached out and took Lena's hand. And without another word, the two of them walked together into the blood-soaked night. Chapter 99. Reo and Lena brought the prisoner back to the house with little resistance. However, neither of them spoke during the return. Lena was still in shock from the tragic devastation they'd passed through and couldn't quite come to terms with it. Reo, on the other hand, was deep in thought about how to deal with the captive in his hand. Since Reo had previously torn the door down to let Burra into the house, it remained wide open, fully exposed to the outside. After Lena had been attacked earlier, there had been no time to tend to Burra. If someone had broken into the house during their absence, Burra might not have survived. Thankfully, the house was located on the border between District 11 and 12, and now that it was dark, no one had approached. Or perhaps the chaos from earlier had left the surrounding residents too overwhelmed to make a move. When they stepped into the house with their captive, Burra was still asleep, seemingly unaware he'd been moved from the garbage mountain. Hope of the dying. Reo raised his right hand and activated the Nen ability he had acquired earlier that day. A black light burst from his palm and shot toward Burra. This time, Reo used the equivalent of Lena's full aura capacity. The black light enveloped Burra, glowing intensely for nearly a minute before it finally faded. As the light dissipated, both Reo and Lena could clearly see Burra's condition. The bandaged wounds covering his massive body had vanished entirely. He now looked completely healed. Perhaps sensing his recovery, Burra scratched his stomach lazily and slowly opened his eyes. Thunk. As Burra awoke, he stretched instinctively, and promptly smashed a hole in the already damaged wall. Reo and Lena both stared at the gaping hole, their expressions twitching. "Ha Lena, finally. I waited so long for you." Burra let his arms drop casually, oblivious to the hole he'd just made. His eyes lit up as he recognized Reo and Lena. He already knew that Lena was bringing a new recruit for the mission, someone who had apparently caused quite a stir during the hunter exam. But then he noticed something strange. "Wait. Lena, why do you look like that? Your clothes are torn up." Lena nodded. It had taken them a full week to find Burra. Without Belle's help, she wasn't sure when they would have located him. "Let's not talk about me. Burra, I told you to meet in District 12. What were you doing all the way in District 10? But before she could continue grilling him, she frowned and asked, "What about those injuries? You're not exactly invincible, but someone with your strength shouldn't have ended up like that." Reo nodded in agreement. Burra's injuries had required more time to heal than Lena's, which meant the people who attacked him weren't just random scavengers. Burra scratched the back of his head and gave a sheepish laugh. "Well, as soon as I got to Meteor City, the scavengers attacked me. They looked desperate, so I fought back. But no matter where I went, people kept attacking me. Their strength wasn't anything special, but it was non-stop. I held out for a day before I had no choice but to retreat toward District 12. On the way, I was attacked again and again. I finally reached District 10 but was completely exhausted. I tried to recover by eating food from my dimensional stomach pouch, but just as I was eating, someone attacked me, someone with strength close to my own. Normally I wouldn't have lost, but I was already injured and out of energy. I had to run and ended up hiding inside a garbage mountain. When I woke up, you two were there." Burra finished with a self-deprecating grin. His large frame and awkward tone were enough to make Reo and Lena burst into laughter. Indeed, Burra's huge body and gentle demeanor made him an easy target in a place like Meteor City. Just surviving had been a miracle. Seeing their reactions, Burra looked even more confused. He'd been running non-stop since arriving, unaware of how cruel this place really was. Had he known sooner, he might never have agreed to this mission. Once the laughter died down, Reo turned serious again. "Lena, what happened tonight? Why were you being chased?" From their aura, it didn't look like those guys had been using Nen for long. Lena, who had just finished laughing at Burra, shot Reo an irritated glare. Does this guy really not know, or is he just pretending? Sure, they're weak to someone like him, but to ordinary people, those guys are powerful Nen users. Anyone strong enough to survive in Meteor City has seen real combat. But for a freak like him, one swing of his sword is enough to end them. Reo blinked at her, clearly puzzled, until she rolled her eyes and sighed. Those people were auxiliary members of the Elder Guard from District 12. The one who led the attack was definitely an official member. And our current mission? It's likely tied to the elders of District 11 or 12. Hearing that, Reo frowned. How had things escalated to involve the Elder Council? Lena noticed his confusion and, realizing she needed to explain further, took a moment to gather her thoughts. Chapter 100. Lena took a breath, gathered her thoughts, and continued explaining to Reo and Boara. I was careless. On the way to the exchange office to get us a new house, I sensed someone following me. But when I noticed they hadn't awakened Nen, I didn't think much of it. But as soon as I came out of the exchange office, 2 members of the Elder Guard ambushed me. They didn't care that we were still near the exchange office and attacked immediately. I dodged one attack, but the other landed. That's how I got this. She glanced at her left arm, a faint wince showing on her face. After that, I had no choice but to run. I couldn't keep up with the fight against 2 Nen users. I managed to escape, but they sent auxiliary Elder Guard troops after me. Reo nodded slowly. Everything started to make sense. The Elder Guard. So they're behind it. That likely means this is connected to one of the elders themselves. He turned to the unconscious prisoner they had brought back earlier. Reo gestured to Boara. Guard the entrance. I don't want anyone seeing what's about to happen. Boara nodded and moved to stand by the doorway. Reo approached the prisoner and gave him a harsh kick, jolting him awake. Gah! The man's eyes fluttered open and immediately widened in panic. 3 people loomed over him, and the one directly in front of him was the same person who had tortured him earlier. Cough. Cough. Reo didn't waste time. He yanked the cloth from the man's mouth and said flatly, "You scream, I kill you." The prisoner's lips clamped shut, and he gave a frantic nod. I ask, you answer. Say more than I ask. You lose a limb. Got it? Again, the man nodded, trembling violently. First question, why were you after Lena? We were ordered to take her alive. And deliver her to the Elder Guard headquarters. Reo narrowed his eyes. Figures. Second, your identity? I'm a supplementary member of the Elder Guard Escort Division. We carry out missions that the main Elder Guard won't handle directly. Reo had already suspected this, but hearing it confirmed was still valuable. Third, why did the Elder Guard target Lena? The man's expression faltered. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked completely lost. His silence told Reo all he needed to know. You don't even know why you were sent? Reo asked, more to himself than anyone else. Clearly, this guy was too low level to know anything important. Reo let out a quiet sigh and flexed his right hand. With a subtle twitch, his fingertips elongated and sharpened. Lena and Boara both noticed the change immediately. Reo had activated Claws of the Killer, the assassination technique passed down in the Zoldyck family. This was the same move he had used once in a fight with Hisoka, though at the time, they'd been too busy surviving to watch closely. Now, Lena and Boara were locked in, curious to see it again. Reo stepped forward. He raised his hand, ready to plunge it straight into the prisoner's chest. The man backed away in terror but hit the wall behind him. No escape. Please. Wait. I heard something. Rio's hand froze just as his claws pierced the man's skin. What did you say? Yesterday. I overheard Captain Bay talking with one of the Elder's guards. They mentioned something, pink hair. And something about a remover master. That's all I heard, I swear. Reo clicked his tongue in disappointment. TCH. So close. I wanted to see if I could rip your heart out cleanly. Buara, still standing at the door, muttered, "Oh, man, I wanted to see that." He didn't notice Lena glaring at him, her expression dark and unreadable. Meanwhile, Reo pulled back and stared at the prisoner with renewed interest. The words pink hair and remover master echoed in his mind. They had to mean something. And he was going to find out what.